You're listening to the Man in the Cage MMA and Combat Sports Podcast. Here's your host, Jeff Brantley.
What's up, everybody? Welcome in episode 93 of the Man in the Cage MMA and Combat Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeff Brantley. I'm so excited to be with you today to recap, break everything down from this past weekend in the combat sports world because, oh boy, right? What was it? An interesting week once again. Not that there's, when you start to be, and many of you guys know this, if you're an MMA fan, boxing fan, there's always something kind of crazy going on in the combat sports world, mixed martial arts boxing. But this last weekend again, were there some interesting things, some size show, circus things, if you will, as we had Floyd Mayweather taking on Logan Paul. I'm going to get into all of that in 1 second, talk about who, even though there was no judges, who comes out of this fight better? Is it Floyd Mayweather or Logan Paul? I'm going to get into all of that in 1 second. I will also get into UFC Vegas 28 as well. We'll talk about Rozenstruik beating Augusto Sakai, where that puts both those fighters, what's next for Rozenstruik. Who would you buy stock in moving forward? Would it be Sakai, or is the easy answer Rozenstruik? I'll get into all of that on episode 93 of the podcast today. So some crazy things ahead, and again, it's because of that Mayweather-Paul fight that I still, day after, I just cannot believe I'm going to be doing a podcast here, an episode, talking about a YouTuber versus one of the greatest boxers of all time, and living to tell the tale, making it the full 8 rounds and making it the distance. I still can't believe it. It's why I'm wearing my Sean O'Malley tie-dye shirt today. I thought it was the only shirt in my closet that could really capture the mood of the day, which is just, wow, the world feels upside down right now, but we're going to break it down. I'll help everybody make sense of everything just a few minutes here on the Man in the Cage MMA and Combat Sports Podcast. And I do have a cool guest coming up. I have Tom Albano coming from fansided.com, Fansided, one of the MMA contributors over there. Tom will jump on with me in part 2 of the show. He'll give his thoughts, further make sense of things, and then we'll get out of here after that. But yeah, a lot coming ahead. The 5-minute topics, I'll go over everything, and then Tom Albano from Fansided jumping on in part 2 of episode 93 of the Man in the Cage MMA and Combat Sports Podcast. You can go to the website for the podcast. It's maninthecagemmma.show. There's an about page there. There's all the latest episodes, links to all the video content, YouTube, all that good stuff. There's a donate button in the top right-hand corner of the screen, a support the show button rather, that you can go donate $1 a month, $10 a month. That help me keep doing what I'm doing. If you love the show, if you love me entertaining you guys, every episode here, at least I try to, hit the support the show button on maninthecagemmma.show, donate as little as $1 a month, all the way up to $10 a month. I love all my supporters already, and I'd be greatly appreciated if you could do that. And then again, just some other cool things, merchandise, swag for the Man in the Cage podcast. It's all up on the website, maninthecagemmma.show. And then go subscribe to the YouTube channel, the Man in the Cage MMA and Combat Sports Podcast. Some of you are already there. Some of you already subscribed to it as it is. But if you haven't yet, go hit that button. Go hit that subscribe button. Now we get the latest notifications whenever a new episode here drops. After, a busy fight weekend, during a busy fight week, previewing a busy fight weekend, whatever it is, you'll get those latest notifications with every single episode. And then you'll also get some other stuff like UFC 4 simulations. We do that here on the Man in the Cage podcast. Some of you have also seen those already, where we'll simulate all the main event fights or even some of the other bigger fights like this weekend. There's so many great fights on 263. Where do you even start? But Adesanya Vettori, Figueiredo Moreno, we'll simulate both of those, and we'll put them up on the YouTube channel with some of my commentary, having some fun with it, as we'll see how the video game has both fights playing out. But that's kind of the stuff you can get up on the Man in the Cage MMA and Combat Sports Podcast YouTube channel. So go hit the notification button, go hit that subscribe button there right now. And then if you're more into the audio platforms, again, maybe you're old school, maybe you're like me, you're driving around, you're busy sometimes, you can go to Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts, guys. We're pretty much everywhere at this point, wherever you listen, if that's easier for you, or do both again. If you can watch the videos when you're at home, if you're in the car though, go listen to the audio version of it, but go hit the follow or subscribe button on all of those as well. That way you don't miss an episode of the Man in the Cage MMA and Combat Sports Podcast. And then follow me on social media, at Man in the Cage Pod on Twitter, at Man in the Cage Pod on Instagram. We're going to have you covered all week, wall to wall. Again, there's so much coming up this week. So many fights. You have the PFL on Thursday. You've got Bellator 260 on Friday. UFC 263 on Saturday. I skipped over. I keep almost forgetting it. There's an Invicta card on Friday night as well. Shakur Stevenson, he returns to the boxing ring on Saturday. There's just so many fights this weekend, but the Man in the Cage MMA and Combat Sports podcast is going to have you covered for every single one of those. We're going to be tweeting out a lot of the media quotes. We're going to be talking about all these fights, previewing all these fights, some live videos, as I said. I'm going to have some episodes drop later this week with a full preview of all these cards, so you don't want to miss a thing. You want to go follow me on Twitter, at Man in the Cage Pod. I always tweet live with the fights as well. And same, not on Instagram, but I do also post content on Instagram. But you want to go follow me both there, at Man in the Cage Pod. All right, everybody, let's get into it. Oh, by the way, before I jump right into my 5-minute topics here and then get to Tom Albano, did have a good birthday weekend. Thank you to everybody out there who wished me a happy birthday on Twitter, everywhere, Facebook, Instagram, wherever it is. I really appreciate it. I should say I don't feel any older right now, being 30 years old, getting into my 30s. But we'll see. Maybe a week from now, maybe tomorrow morning, maybe I'll feel a little different being 30 now. My first podcast here, doing my first podcast since officially turning 30. Maybe I'll feel a little different tomorrow. Maybe the old vocal cords won't be the same in the morning. I have no idea. We'll see. I'll let you know. At Man in the Cage Pod on Twitter, at Man in the Cage Pod on Instagram. But again, thank you to everybody out there who made it a special day for me, especially my wife, my family, everybody, and Mike Goldberg. By the way, shout out to Mike Goldberg. Maybe I'll put that up on social media or some of those, maybe at least part of it. I don't know if I want to post the whole thing. I'm not trying to take advantage of Mike Goldberg out there, but the former UFC commentator, the former Bellator commentator, I believe he's getting into some bare knuckle boxing stuff right now. The wife got a cameo of him wishing me a happy birthday. That was pretty cool for Mike Goldberg. So shout out to Mike Goldberg as well for making that a special birthday for me, and again, my family and everything. And lastly there, Bellator. Hi, Bellator, UFC, somebody go hire Mike Goldberg. The guy's awesome. Go hire him, somebody. Mike Goldberg needs to be working somewhere in the combat sports realm, but it was a fun birthday, and thank you to everybody out there. All right, enough about me. Let's get into the combat sports today. Shout out to the sponsors as we jump into topic number 1 here, my 5-minute topics. Again, DBK Media, an official sponsor on the show, one of the newer sponsors of the show, of course. Go follow them on Twitter and on Instagram, at DBK Media. They do a great job. They handle all my videos, a lot of my videos, a lot of things I've been doing on the side as well with a lot of my content. So shout out to DBK Media. They do a great job. Go check them out on those social media platforms. Go check out their website. Fantastic sponsor, a fantastic group of people over there. Also, Bovada. I've always talking about that. There's a lot of fights. Speaking of, again, coming up this weekend with the PFL, Bellator, UFC, boxing, all of it. If you want to place any action on any of those, go check out Bovada. It's bit.ly/the Man in the Cage. That's where you click on that link, use my link, and you can sign up for Bovada. They have some cool bonuses, some cool offers over there. So go check out Bovada right now as well. All right, so those are the sponsors of the show, and we'll get into topic number 1 here on the program, which will be, and as I always like to do here on the show, sometimes I like to peel the curtain back, right? Take you behind the scenes on the podcast, how I planned the show out, how everything was, planning-wise going into the show. Originally, my first topic today, coming off of the weekend, I had planned on Friday or Saturday, being UFC Vegas 28. I was going to talk about Rozenstruik. I was going to talk about Sakai. Were they the 2 biggest names in combat sports? Was it the greatest card of all time in combat sports? Certainly the UFC, mixed martial arts. No, it was not. But that's what I was going to do. I was not going to talk about the sideshow of a YouTuber versus Floyd Mayweather, even though it's a spectacle. I enjoyed it. I was going to watch the fight. I was going to talk about it today. I planned on getting that in like topic number 2 or 3 or 4. But I changed my mind today. I was forced to change my mind after watching this last night because I have some, we'll say, interesting thoughts on this fight between Logan Paul and Floyd Mayweather. Some that many of you out there might agree with. Many of you out there might hate me over these thoughts. We'll see. And again, you can tweet at me, at Man in the Cage Pod. But let's start the clock here. Put the 5 minutes up. Logan Paul, he goes the distance with Floyd Mayweather. The most notable thing out of that, because Floyd, would he have won a decision? Again, no judges allowed. Knockouts were allowed. The knockout didn't happen, so no judges. So no one officially won this contest. But Floyd, if you would have, if you look at the CompuBox numbers, if you watched it, Floyd was the better fighter as far as accuracy goes. He did land some more punches. He showed off most of his defensive acumen that he's shown throughout his career. Logan Paul tried to land some bombs. He actually threw some more punches. He actually landed a few more punches than I thought he would. But otherwise, it was all Floyd Mayweather. But again, no judges. So the bigger question coming out of this fight, and this is why this is a nightmare, in my opinion, for Floyd Mayweather, of who truly won this fight. Because you can look at it 2 ways. You can look at it again as saying, well, Floyd, yes, he would have won the decision. So as a boxing match, did Floyd Mayweather get beat by a YouTuber? No, he did not. If this was an actual boxing match, and who knows, maybe Floyd would have even taken it a little bit more seriously had it been a real boxing match, Floyd would have been 51-0. he would have beaten Logan Paul here. I'm gonna call Logan Paul like Jake Paul like 8 times today. He would have beaten Logan Paul though. So, there's that side of the thinking, but then there's the other side, and that's where I'm kind of on that today. That there's the other side that you look at it though and you go, should Floyd Mayweather have put away a YouTuber, a guy who doesn't have extensive fighting experience? And this is combat sports, and Floyd is in his 40s. He has been inactive. He is facing the bigger fighter there. It was only an 8-round fight, albeit 3-minute rounds. So you still had the normal rounds, but it was an 8-round fight. There's a lot going in that, but still, should he have put the YouTuber away in this one? The inexperienced fighter you think would not even stand a shot, any reasonable chance. And that's why I kept asking guys, Jeremy Harris's, Jason from Glove Talk, anybody, my prediction this last week. That's why everybody just wanted to know, does Logan Paul have any shot? Well, it turns out he did have a shot. And that's why my biggest takeaway from last night with that Logan Paul-Floyd Mayweather fight is that, in my opinion, Logan Paul won the fight. Again, did he win the decision? Would he have won a decision had there been judges? No, he wouldn't have. No, he didn't. But to me, this fight was about bragging rights. This fight was about perception. Who gets the better perception? Who gets the bragging rights coming out of Floyd Mayweather versus Logan Paul? It's Logan Paul. He can tell his kids now. He can brag. He can go on his YouTube channel. He could go call anybody. Anybody. He could go tell everybody, go tell the world, I went 8 rounds with Floyd Mayweather. Yes, you can throw the excuses out for Floyd. Yes, you can say this and that. At the end of the day, the results are the results, though. And he did go that. So, to me, the bragging rights, which, by the way, again, this fight was labeled as that. Bragging rights. They had it everywhere. # bragging rights. No one has more bragging rights now except for more so than Logan Paul. He could say he did that. So, in my opinion, perception, bragging rights-wise, Logan Paul wins this going away. Floyd Mayweather makes the money. He doesn't care. But is that a good look for Floyd? No, it's not. It's not a good look for Floyd. So, this is a win for Logan Paul. Any more so, a massive win for the Paul brothers. They're more legitimate than ever now. They went out there with one of the most legitimate fighters of all time, one of the greatest fighters, if not the greatest boxer, one of the greatest fighters in all combat sports of all time, and they lived the tale. They went the distance, and now they're able to brag about it. And there's no official decision. So, they always talk about in baseball, right? If a guy has a bloop hit or a guy has a bunt hit, it shows up in the box score the next day in the paper as a hit. Someone that's looking at that box score back in the day, younger kids won't get that reference, but for you older people out there, in the next day in the newspaper, it shows as a hit. You don't know that it was a bloop single. It looks the same in the box score the next day as a 300-foot double. Same thing here for Logan Paul. I mean, it looks in the box score like he went 8 rounds with him, which he did, obviously. So I think it's a massive win for the Paul brothers. I think bragging rights-wise and perception-wise, the Paul brothers, and especially Logan Paul here, walk out of this fight the better out of them and Floyd Mayweather. Again, say what you want about Floyd winning the decision, the imaginary decision here, since there wasn't one, but still, I think that's where I'm at with this fight, is that they got the better of it. And that's why, going into my next point now to finish up topic number 1 here, and again, I'm going to go a little over with this just a little bit, but my next topic is, I'm really worried that I'm starting to change my mind a little bit on these YouTube stars, these YouTube sensation guys in the boxing world being a good thing for boxing. I'm not completely changing my mind, but I'm starting to get a little bit more in the mindset again that this is cheapening the sport. And I do worry that how does this make the sport look? Because again, I've had guys like Jeremy Harris on, I've had guys from Jason from Glove Talk on. I've agreed with them. I've been up there on Twitter. I've been there everywhere defending these fights, saying, hey, you know what? I don't see an issue with them. You're getting new eyes on the sport. You're getting, if you get a few new fans, what does it hurt, right? But stuff like this last night, when you have a legitimate great, a boxing great, go in there with a guy who has, let's face it, almost no combat sports experience. There are guys fighting in LFA right now. There's guys in Cage Warriors. There's guys in other parts of the world. And those are just a couple of promotions off the top of my head I'm throwing out there. 1 championship. We could just go around the world, right? There's a bunch of more people that have more experience than Logan Paul does. But Logan Paul went the distance. I think that cheapens the sport a little bit. I honestly do. And again, you can throw out there the 40-year-old thing from Floyd. I'm going to keep bringing that up because are there some excuses that, wasn't, looking back on it now, kind of silly to think it was a foregone conclusion to get a knockout? Maybe, but still, I think it cheapens it a little bit. So I don't think this was a great night for boxing last night. I don't think it was a great night at all. And, even more so of just the fight even itself, Floyd not putting a YouTuber away and a YouTuber going the distance with him. But the fight wasn't all that exciting. It was boring. And that's why I just think, where's the interest going forward on this? Are people going to want to watch this again? And people, if there was a new boxing fan that was into the sport last night, did that make them want to watch boxing more? Did that make them want to watch Floyd Mayweather or research Floyd Mayweather more? They probably know less about Floyd now than ever. They say, hey, if it was some young person out there who was really into Logan Paul and the Paul brothers, they probably walk away thinking the Paul brothers are the greatest thing in boxing, greatest things to slice bread in the combat sports world. So I don't know if that was a great night. I don't think, actually, I know it wasn't a great night for boxing, and I'm worried about these events moving forward, that what's going to happen here? Is this going to cheapen it some more every time out? I don't want to keep seeing this. If this keeps happening, stuff like this, with especially the rest of the cards, and that'll be my last little point here on this, that the card itself was all right, and I'll get to more of the rest of the card in a second here in topic, I believe, number 3. But if the card's not a very entertaining card and you get things like this, results like this, where a YouTuber hangs in there with actual legitimate fighters, and it's not exciting, where does that leave the sport? So I think it hurt a little bit last night. I don't want to if things like this keep happening, I don't want to see this over and over again. I don't want to see YouTubers go in there against boxing legends, make it look like it's easy, and then also the fight be very boring. Are they getting paid? Did Logan Paul get paid? Did people get rich off of this? Yes. But does the sport itself get rich off of that? No, it does not. And Showtime, any of these networks, good luck. Good luck trying to sell these in the future if this keeps happening. So I don't want to see that happen too many times. We'll see. Tyron Woodley's facing Jake Paul coming up. It'll be interesting. We'll see what happens in this YouTuber saga, and I'll be sure to break him down right here on the Man of the Cage MMA and Combat Sports Podcast. All right, enough of that fight. I will get back into the rest of that card in a second here, as well as the UFC Vegas 28, the rest of that card as well. But we'll get to the main event here. Put 5 more minutes back up on the clock. Jairzinho Rozenstruik taking on Augusto Sakai this past Saturday, UFC Vegas 28 main event. I talked about it last week that one of these guys was going to break into the top 5 probably. Or if Sakai was going to win, maybe he gets to number 6, right? But he was going to be close. Both these guys, whoever won, it was going to be a big moment for them, because then all of a sudden you go from being that fringe top 10 guy for a Sakai, and then all of a sudden you're a fringe top 5 guy, you're in the top 5, and then Rozenstruik, you're definitely into the top 5. Well, Rozenstruik goes out there, knocks him out in the first round, puts the performance that he needs together against Augusto Sakai, putting him away in the first round, looking the way he did. And now Rozenstruik, I expect him to climb into the top 5 of the heavyweight rankings. I haven't seen any updates yet today. Let me refresh the UFC website real quick to see if they've updated it. It still says May 24th last updated. So it might come tomorrow, we'll see, or maybe it'll be later tonight. But I fully expect Alexander Volkov to move up to 4. And then Rozenstruik to move up to 5, and then Curtis Blades drop to number 6. We'll see. I mean, it would be the worst thing if Rozenstruik stayed at number 6. No, but I expect him to jump up into that top 5 with a win like that. And boy, did he need it. I mean, that's the type of win coming off of some of the road and some of the speed bumps that he's hit, some of the potholes he's hit recently, to keep him relevant. And more importantly, vault him up to where maybe he can make a title run now. And the thing that was most impressive about this, and it's not just the win. A win is a win, right? You got to go out there. You got to handle business. If you don't get the win, what does it matter? But when you do get the win, obviously, you want it to be one that you can look back on and take something away from. And for me, I can really take something away from this fight for Jairzinho Rozenstruik because of how he fought and how he attacked Augusto Sakai. He pushed Sakai back in this fight. And I talked about that last week, too, on episode 92, previewing this fight, that Augusto Sakai is very uncomfortable getting pushed back. When he's pushing forward, he's very good. The Overeem fight, when he's pushing forward and he's putting pressure on you, he looks very comfortable. He can be very dangerous with his footwork. Pushing him back, though, in his career, Sakai doesn't look the same. He looks uncomfortable. I was very hesitant. I was worried in this fight, though, that Rozenstruik was not going to push him back, that he was going to be countering the whole time. And first part of that round, you see Rozenstruik trying to throw some counter left hands, trying to throw some counter punches on Augusto Sakai. But then at some point, I don't know if it clicked for him, or if it was just part of the game plan, or, maybe it just the way the fight started going. But then you saw Rozenstruik change some things. He started using his own footwork. He started cutting off the octagon himself. He started pushing forward. He started throwing, multiple combinations, throwing a big leg kick into with his boxing, his combinations with all of his punches there. He started putting all that together, And what do you know? He wins. He knocks Augusto Sakai out in the first round of their fight and gets into the top 5 now and gets that big win he needed. And that's just why it's so impressive to me that we hadn't seen that necessarily all the time from Rozenstruik. Now, do we have to see it even more moving forward? Absolutely. But seeing him use his footwork the way he did to push Sakai back, make him uncomfortable, then putting a lot of his punches together. And that knockout, by the way, too, the combination, the sequence that he had to knock out Augusto Sakai, really a thing of beauty. I mean, he fakes to the body with his left hand. I believe he may have even faked, I think he faked upstairs first with the left hand, then went back downstairs to the body of the left hand, then came back up as Sakai is trying to circle out of the corner. As again, Rozenstruik cut him off in the octagon, hits him with a little bit of a left hand, but then the punch that really did him in is then he follows it up with a straight right, a little bit behind the ear, but a little bit on the ear. Obviously, wasn't a legal punch, but knocks the equilibrium of Sakai off. He goes to the ground, he follows it with some accurate hammer fist, does Rozenstruik, gets the win. Beautiful performance and a great performance, the one he needed. And if he does that moving forward, puts that effort together, puts that game plan together, puts those sequences like that together, Rozenstruik could be a real player in the heavyweight division. We just haven't seen it enough from him. We've seen the big knockouts. We've seen him losing to Overeem and then, pull that power out of his back pocket. But we haven't seen that from him where we've seen it, but we haven't seen it enough. And he showed it more here in this fight against Augusto Sakai. We need to see it more from him moving forward if he's going to be a real contender in the heavyweight division. But very promising there, and he's going to move into the top 5 now, in my opinion. And I think he probably faces the loser of Cyril Gane versus Alexander Volkov. I think that'd be a very good fight for him. We'll see what the UFC does there. Real quick on Sakai, though, as I'm running out of time, 30 more seconds on the topic here. For Sakai, I think it's real simple now. He's got things to clean up. Is there things that he does that are really good? Yes. But he needs to clean some things up. Again, the most important thing being he has to get comfortable moving backwards. Sakai is not he doesn't even have as much power as a Rozenstruik does, or some of these other guys. He's obviously not Francis Ngannou. He's not even Stipe Miocic. He's good, some things he's good at, but he's not really great at one thing necessarily besides maybe Muay Thai, coming forward, putting the pressure on. But what happens when you're getting pushed back, which is going to happen a lot? You're facing Derek Lewis. You're facing Alexander Volkov. You're facing Cyril Gane. You're facing all these guys, Francis Ngannou. They're going to be pushing you back a lot of times if you're not an elite power puncher. Not to say everyone's got a little bit of power in heavyweight division, but he's not going to be knocking guys out with one shot necessarily. So he's going to have to get comfortable moving back. That's his issue right now. He's got to be able to get more comfortable about that. He's got to pull something out. He's got to develop some tips of the trade, some tricks of the trade to be able to do some more things, even just footwork-wise there. I mean, if he's able to circle out a little bit better, if he doesn't get caught, if he doesn't allow Rozenstruik to cut off the octagon like that, if he's able to circle out, get to the center of the octagon, it's a different story maybe for Augusto Sakai there, as he might be able to get out of the first round and get his game plan going. So he's got to fix some of that. And that's why one of my big questions today as well, and I'll ask Tom Albano coming up in just a little bit here on part 2 of the show, the same question, but which stock would you rather have moving forward? I think it's a very fascinating one of, would you rather have Rozenstruik stock or would you rather have Sakai stock coming off of this last performance here on UFC Vegas 28? I think Rozenstruik's the easy answer, certainly, because he just beat him, and he's going to be in the top 5, and he might even get the title shot sooner. But I think it's an interesting question because I don't think you could totally write Sakai off here. I think if Sakai develops, as I said, something where he can get pushed back a little bit better, he's more comfortable at it, maybe even just all these performances, he'll get a little bit more patient with it, a little bit more comfortable, see things a little bit better. I think he could still be a player in this division, so I think it's a very interesting question. Rozenstruik's the easy answer, but I still might buy Sakai's stock after this one, as crazy as it is. I think Rozenstruik showed some things, but I think he has a lot of questions still moving forward. Can he do this consistently? If he's just counterpunching, if he reverts to his old self, he's not as aggressive, and he's not throwing multiple punches, he's not putting combinations together, and he's just fighting like a kickboxer, where's his stock at? Does he have a potential to be a champion? So I'm going to go with, and maybe nobody does with the power Ngannou has, but I'm going to go with, maybe I would buy Sakai stock now, especially because it's probably a little cheaper right now for you stock investors out there, for you investors. Sakai stock is a little cheaper right now. I might go with that, but I think it's an interesting question. Whose stock you'd rather have right now moving forward, Rozenstruik's or Augusto Sakai? Tweet at me at ManInTheCagePod there. All right, that's topic number 2 of our 5-minute topics. I'll get into my next topic now, topic number 3, going through the rest of the UFC Vegas 28 card, some of the prelims, undercard, that thing, and then I'll get to the rest of the Mayweather-Paul card. But the rest of the UFC UFC Vegas 28 main card. In some of the undercard as well. Marcin Tybura, he gets a massive win over Walt Harris. You got to feel for Harris, the guy, everything he's been through in his life personally with his family. You got to feel for him a little bit. But you got to feel excited about everything Marcin Tybura has been able to do. 5 fights in a row he's been able to win in a row here after a point in his career where it looked like maybe Tybura might not be in the UFC much longer. Maybe he was on that, that chopping block that eventually he was going to be cut by the UFC. Now he's won 5 fights in a row. He's beaten guys like Walt Harris who are athletic, who do have a lot of potential. I'll use that word, potential, which can be dangerous sometimes. But, a good win for Marcin Tybura here again. He gets the TKO win in the first round, and now he's going to break his way into the top 10. You got to feel good for Marcin Tybura there. And this heavyweight division is so interesting right now. You know who the champion is. It's undoubtedly Francis Ngannou after the way he knocked out Stipe Miocic and looked competent in the wrestling department. There's no doubt about that. We know what Stipe is. We know what some of these other guys are. There's so many new names and there's so many changing pieces here. It's an interesting division right now in the UFC, the heavyweight division, but you got to feel good for Tybura. And that one, the fight of the night, Santiago Ponzinibbio, he beats Miguel Baeza by slight decision. Very close fight, very fun fight. Both these guys landing some shots on each other. Miguel Baeza coming forward at times, looking like he might put Ponzinibbio away. Ponzinibbio himself coming forward on Miguel Baeza, looking like he might put the kid away at some point. They end up going to decision. Good slugfest. Ponzinibbio gets the slight decision there, and it's one of those rare fights where you leave the fight with the impression, or you leave the fight with, speaking of stocks again, knowing that both men's stock in this fight, even though there was a loser Baeza, nobody's stock went down here. We learned that Ponzinibbio is still a badass, and we learned, more importantly, I think, that Miguel Baeza is for real. That was a test. He passed it. It's very rare in pro sports, especially combat sports, mixed martial arts. It's very rare that somebody passes a test when they lose. But this is one of those instances. And, Baeza will probably be the first to tell you, and he had coach out there, anybody will say there's no moral victories in sports, right? To me, there's a moral victory here, though. The moral victory is Miguel Baeza pushed a very, very, very good to great fighter in Ponzinibbio to the brink. Hung in there, didn't get stopped, almost won it himself. He just has to make, small adjustments here and there. But that's the growing process. So you leave this fight thinking, hey, Ponzinibbio is still a badass, and Baeza, though, his stock does not go down either. I think his stock is actually higher than it was before the fight, believe it or not, even after losing to Ponzinibbio here. The rest of the card, Gregor Rodriguez, amazing story. He beats Dusko Todorovic. Fantastic story, Rodriguez. This past week on Media Day, talking about his ride of a few weeks ago, he was fighting in LFA. Has an upset win in LFA, comes to the UFC, somewhat short notice here, and then upsets Todorovic. Gets in there, does what he needs to do. Gregor Rodriguez, a great story right now in the UFC. We'll see how long it lasts. I'm still not very high on him, but certainly right now he's creating his own luck. He's running a lot of momentum. And it'll be fun to see him step back into the octagon sometime soon. Montana De La Rosa, she gets the win over Ariana Lipski. Ends up stopping her in the second round via TKO with some ground and pound. Montana De La Rosa is one of those fighters you got to watch. And she reminds me a little bit of, not all the way, but she reminds me a little bit of Mackenzie Dern right now, where Dern had her jiu-jitsu. She's world-class jiu-jitsu ace. She had her huge strengths. But at a time, there was a period, though, where her striking wasn't good enough. Her wrestling wasn't good enough. And to say she's elite at any of those things now, I wouldn't say that. But there was a time where she looked like, she's not going to be anything special ever. Mackenzie Dern's gotten good enough in other areas, though, where she's more than respectable, and she could maybe fight for a title sometime soon. Montana De La Rosa, again, not totally the same way, but I see some similar things where she's getting better fight in and fight out, and she has some wrestling when she wants to use it. She can use some of her boxing that's improved, which was kind of her downfall, some of her weaknesses as well. So Montana De La Rosa is someone to watch out for. Not saying, again, that she's going to be anything special, but she's getting better fight in and fight out, and she showed that here against Ariana Lipski. As she used the good fight IQ, she used the smart fight IQ, got the fight to the ground, finished it there. And then last point I want to do as I get out of last point about a fighter, one of these fights on UFC Vegas 28 I want to talk about before I get out of topic number 3 here, is Mason Jones. And for the diehard listeners of the Man in the Cage podcast, you know this. I've been talking about Mason Jones way back in his Cage Warrior days, right? I was advocating coming out of the pandemic or right before the pandemic when everything was hitting. I was thinking Mason Jones was going to be close to making his UFC debut, being signed by the UFC. He ends up getting signed by the UFC here now. And he hasn't had a whole lot of luck. So he fights Mike Davis, right? He loses to Mike Davis. Tough fight, though. That's one of the toughest fights I've ever seen. Maybe not the toughest. Well, I'd have to go look historically. But that's one of the toughest fights you'll ever see a prospect, a quote-unquote prospect, or someone making their UFC debut have. And you've got guys out there like Lando Venata, whose debut was Tony Ferguson. Yeah, you can throw those in there. But I mean like legitimate, like Mason Jones has a very high stock coming out of a promotion, and that next promotion throwing them into a tough veteran fight, a tough fight that some might say is unwinnable. You know what I mean? Not that the fight against Davis was unwinnable for Mason Jones, but you know what I mean. You don't see that very often. So he gets that. He didn't have luck in it. He loses the fight. Then here, in this spot against Alan Patrick, he goes out there and he's beating him up. I mean, it's only a matter of time before he's either going to get the finish or just beat him up till he gets like a 30-26, 30-25, something like that decision win is Mason Jones. Has the unintentional eye poke, no contest in this one. So again, the luck for Mason Jones. He's still winless technically in the UFC, but he was going to win this one. But even having said that, he hasn't had a lot of luck. He's going to find it at some point. And when he does, I think Mason Jones is going to be a massive problem. I could be a little biased there again that I'm a big Mason Jones guy. But I think at some point when he does fight his footing and he does get over this bad hump of bad luck, I think he's going to be very tough. You know, he's got some real technical boxing when he wants it. He's got a super tough chin. We saw that in the Mike Davis fight. You can't teach chins, right? You can't teach having that kind of a chin. He's got a great chin. He's got some good boxing, some good striking. He's got good enough jiu-jitsu. He's got good enough wrestling to put guys away there, compete with guys there. He's going to be a hard out. I mean, how do you beat Mason? I always say this with guys like Mason Jones. How do you beat him? You got to be better than him. I mean, technically, right? I mean, you're going to have to go out there and piece him up. You're going to have to go out there and really out-wrestle him. You're not going to just be able to go out there and, he's not going to give up in the fight, right? So Mason Jones is one of those guys that you're going to really have to watch out for. I think he's going to be a massive problem for a lot of fighters moving forward because of all the things he does well. Again, does he have some things he still needs to improve? Everybody does, but I really like what I've seen from Mason Jones. That was UFC Vegas 28. Interesting card, had some fun fights. Again, the Ponzinibbio Baeza fight was a great one. Had some other fun spots on it, and we'll move into the next card now, UFC 263 coming up later this week on Saturday, which I'll get into in topic number 5, actually start flipping the page a little bit there. But topic number 4, last one before we turn the page a little bit, and I'll still go back and we'll go back and talk about these UFC Vegas 28 card as well as the Mayweather-Paul card with my guy Tom Albano coming up in a second here from Fansided. But last one from me here on this past weekend, the rest of that Mayweather-Paul card, and I'm going to cut this one a little short since I went over the last one, and frankly, this card was kind of a disaster. I mean, Badou Jack, he gets the win over Dervin Colina. Easy win for Badou Jack, though. Had it been Jean Pascal versus Badou Jack, that would have been a fabulous fight. There would have been a lot of hype behind it. I think it would have been an interesting one. But Pascal gets busted for every single steroid underneath the sun, and then we get Badou Jack in the co-main event versus Dervin Colina. Did exactly what you thought he was going to do. I mean, they were talking on the broadcast about Colina this being the first time he had ever been to the United States. I mean, it was just a bad recipe. Short notice, never been to the U.S. Now all of a sudden you're fighting in Miami against this guy, Badou Jack, who has been established in the boxing world. That was a bad recipe. So Badou Jack gets the easy win in the co-main event. Best fight of the night was the one before that, Jared Hurd and Luis Arias. Arias gets the win by just throwing right hands from hell all night, where Jared Hurd was fighting in a phone booth with him in his corner. They were trying to get him to do some different things, but he was standing toe-to-toe with them, and he landed his own shots here and there, had a knockdown late in the fight, did Jared Hurd. And Jared Hurd had some ring rust. So did Arias, though, looking at him. He was another guy who he also was coming off of some long layoffs, but Hurd had that too, so maybe it affected him more than anybody here in this matchup between Arias and Hurd, but Arias just kept coming forward to that pocket, and that right hand was there all night for him, where Hurd kept his kept his left hand way too low the whole night, wasn't making adjustments, wasn't picking that up, and Arias was just walking forward and tagging him with some big bombs, putting some combinations on him. Best fight of the night, just because, again, Hurd did have some moments, but good win for Arias on that stage like that, where Hurd was certainly maybe the A side of that matchup, if you will, as far as name recognition goes. But Arias put himself on the map with that win. That was a very good win over Jared Hurd. Gets the decision victory there. And then last one I'll talk about before getting to topic number 5, flipping the page here to this weekend's cards, or the end of the week cards here as well. Chad Johnson versus Brian Maxwell. All you can do is laugh about this one, that you have a former football player taking on a bare knuckle boxer who hasn't won a bare knuckle boxing contest as far as record goes. and then also his 0-1 in his professional boxing career. And there was, I believe this is an exhibition too. I believe at the end, so there's no actual winner to this contest, as it should have been. That's good. I mean, anytime a guy like Brian Maxwell is going to step in there with Chad Johnson, a football player, be a little bit more of a sideshow again. Yeah, I mean, it's good to not have the judges there, if you will. Chad Johnson probably would have won the fight, actually, or it would have been a draw, I would say, because Brian Maxwell got the knockdown late in the fight. He would have got a 10-8 round, as he might have been able to even put Chad Johnson away had that fight been longer. But Chad Ochocinco Johnson there, just a funny fight because it looked even more sideshow than even the YouTubers. And anytime somebody's willing to get in the squared circle like that, I respect them, right? You're getting in there, you're getting hit. I'm not going to disrespect anybody. Anyone should go chase their dreams. Chad Johnson talked about that a little bit after the fight, that he went in there, he did it, he's proud of himself. He should be. But I think there's also a sentiment here. I think there's also a narrative that, look at the football player. He's so athletic. He went in there and did it. Let's pump the brakes on that. Brian Maxwell's not a great fighter. He knocked him down once. Again, no disrespect to anybody. He's stepping in there, especially bare knuckle boxing later this month. But it was what it was. It was kind of funny. It was kind of intriguing. But there you go. I don't actually do. This is the first time ever on the Man in the Cage podcast. I'm actually speechless. I have no idea what to say about this matchup other than, yeah, Chad Johnson got knocked down and he won the fight, I guess. He would have maybe gotten a draw if it wasn't for the knockdown. The rest of the fight is he did just enough to win it. But he didn't want any piece of Maxwell, really. He was just trying to dance on the outside. And there's not too much there. That was, and that's why, again, going back to my original point, topic number one, that this being a bad night for boxing last night, that just adds on to it even more. That, yeah, the main event, you see a YouTuber going the distance with one of the greatest, if not the greatest of all time, and then you also have it be a boring fight. Then you got Badu Jack, Dervin Kalina, that wasn't all that intriguing. Yeah, Jared Hurd, Luis Arias, okay, exciting, good fight. But then Chad Johnson, Brian Maxwell wasn't intriguing. It was intriguing a little bit, but is that something that's going to make you get buy the pay-per-view next time? They got to be a little careful with these. Again, this is something that the Showtime and these other cards, Triller, all of them can do a little bit to make these cards be more respectable, if you will. You know what I mean? That if you make the rest of the card even better, part of that's because John Pascal dropped off, but if you get some other legitimate fights on these cards and you make it intriguing all around, I think some of the sideshow stuff becomes less. The issue last night, though, was you didn't really have any intriguing spots, really. The Hurd-Arias fight, cool. That was it. That was the only really... And then once the Mayweather fight started, you realize, this is kind of interesting, but at the end of the day, this wasn't that interesting. It was a boring fight. So, yeah, boxing's got to be careful with some of this stuff. Some of these cards, the YouTubers, you got to be a little careful. They got to make sure they stack these a little bit better. Overall structure of these cards. That's probably my biggest takeaway from the Floyd Mayweather Logan Paul card there. All right, let's start turning the page here, and then I'll get to my guy, Tom Albano, in a second here from Fanside, and we'll go over everything, get his thoughts on the Mayweather-Paul fight, get his thoughts on UFC Vegas 28, and then also get some of his thoughts on this weekend's fights, and then I'll come back with my 3 parting shots and get the heck out of here today on this weird Monday here on the Man in the Cage podcast, breaking down YouTube fights. But fortunately for us, coming up this weekend, topic number 5 here, as I put 5 more minutes back up on the clock, a lot of great action, a lot of great mixed martial arts, some good boxing too. Shakur Stevenson, I mentioned it already a couple times. He's going to be back in action on ESPN, returning to the boxing ring himself. So you have some decent boxing coming up this weekend, and you've got great mixed martial arts all week. If you're an MMA fan, this is one of those weeks that you just absolutely love. You've got PFL on Thursday, you've got Bellator 260 on Friday, you've got Invicta on Friday night as well, you've got UFC 263 on Saturday. Just so much MMA, so much boxing, all that wall to wall all week here. And again, make sure you keep it right here on the Man in the Cage podcast for all of your coverage. Follow me on Twitter at Man in the Cage Pod. But just so many good fights coming up, and that's why I'm just going to lay it out. 5 storylines, we'll say, or 5 fights that I'm really intrigued with coming up later this weekend. Some of them, they're going to be the easiest ones in the world, obviously. Some of them, they're going to be ones you can already guess. But maybe it's towards the end. Maybe it'll shock you a little bit of one of my fights one of my storylines this week that I'm really watching in the MMA and combat sports world here. But the first fight, the first storyline I'm really watching, it has to be Israel Adesanya and Marvin Vettori for the middleweight title. Had Adesanya not lost that last fight, had he not lost to Jan Blachowicz going up a weight class, I don't know if I would have been as intrigued about this one. And it's not because Marvin Vettori, I don't think, has any chance to push him here, because I think that's the best way to sum up what Vettori did the first time against Adesanya. Did Vettori win that fight against Adesanya the first time around? No. But did he push him a little bit? Yeah. I mean, he gave him maybe one of his toughest tests of mixed martial arts so far, certainly the UFC. So there's some intrigue there, but I don't know if it would be enough for me to totally get into this matchup and say, yes, I'm so excited for this. I mean, anytime Adesanya fights, you are like that a little bit, but I don't know if it would be that extra oomph to this matchup. You know what I mean? But the fact that Adesanya is coming off of a loss, like he did last time out, going up a weight class, this fight intrigues me even more. What kind of Adesanya are we going to see show up? I generally think historically here, he's shown that when he does have a boring fight or he does trip up a bit in his career, the next time out, he tends to go out there and really show out and put a great performance together. The Yoel Romero fight, say whatever you want about it. Next fight out, he comes out and he just absolutely waxes Paulo Costa. So I'm curious to see what Adesanya would get here. Does he come out and wax him again, or does Adesanya trip up? Mentally, where is he going to be in this matchup? Does Vettori have the game plan now? Does he have the blueprint? We saw when you actually really put Adesanya on his back, when you really wrestle with him, you really put him on his back, he doesn't really have anything to offer. That's what Vettori's going to try to do, especially early. Although last time out, he started to get a little tired. That's why I am interested about Adesanya Vettori. I'm very interested in that matchup coming up later this week, 263, of course. Next one, you'll also be able to guess Deiveson Figueiredo, Brandon Moreno, one of the fight of the year contenders last year. Very good fight the first time around. Very close, obviously. Ends up being a draw there. The point taken away from Figueiredo certainly added to that. But you have the power of Figueiredo versus Brandon Moreno. Brandon Moreno's got the chin, so he can absorb a lot of those shots. Moreno, though, has more of the volume. He's got decent boxing, better than decent boxing. I think he's got really good boxing, actually. His ground game is decent enough where he can hang with a guy like Figueiredo who's just looking to snatch your neck, looking to go for those submissions. So Figueiredo Moreno 2 here, again, obviously for the flyweight title, also on 263. Also going to be very interesting to see what happens in this matchup. So that's my number 2. Obviously, those ones very obvious. And then the next one also maybe a little bit obvious, but Douglas Lima taking on Yaroslav Amosov on the Bellator 260 main card, or the main event of that one for the welterweight title. Again, another easy one to predict because it is for the welterweight title. Amosov is undefeated in his career. Douglas Lima, we've seen what he's been able to do in Bellator, what he's been able to do in his mixed martial arts career. That's a very good fight, and I could see this one being one where Amosov's zero does go, where he isn't undefeated anymore. Or I could see him going out there and really working Douglas Lima. And again, I'll get more into all this later in the week, my official preview. But Amosov here, he's shown a lot of things. His wrestling, his grappling, his striking. I'm not going to say he's Khabib, right? No one's Khabib. But he's shown a lot of great skills in his Bellator career where he's one of those guys you definitely have to watch when he's in the cage, the Bellator cage. And he gets the matchup here, a title fight against Douglas Lima. That's my third fight I'm really interested in, the one I'm really keeping tabs on coming up later this week. And then the final 2 here of my top 5 storylines or fights for UFC 263, Bellator 260, PFL, all that stuff. The next 2 maybe shock you maybe a little bit. This one, less so maybe a little bit, but Clarissa Shields, Brittany Elkins on the PFL card. Listen, Clarissa Shields, what's she going to be full-time? What is she going to be when she fully, and again, she's going to box. She's still going to be in boxing in her great boxing career that she's had. She's still going to keep doing that. But what happens when she keeps fighting in MMA and she keeps facing better talent? Is she going to get exposed at some point? I think she will, but this has a lot of intrigue here for me. Does she get tripped up the first fight out, or does she go out there and wax Brittany Elkins? Because we've seen before some fighters that do have those boxing fundamentals can really have a lot of success in mixed martial arts. The grappling will be where she struggles. And that's where if you're Brittany Elkins here, you're just going to go shoot takedowns all night. But Clarissa Shields is athletic. She's working at Jackson Wink with John Jones, Holly Holm, all of them over there. This will be an interesting fight. I'm really curious about Shields, Brittany Elkins later this week. Even though some diehard MMA fans will hate that, I'm really interested to see what happens to Clarissa Shields in that fight, if she's able to win or not. And then the last one is from UFC 263, and there's so many spots you could go. You could go with Nate Diaz, Leon Edwards. Although later this week I'll say on the preview, I actually think might not be that competitive. We'll see. Depends what Nate Diaz shows up, where he's at in his career. There's so many spots on that 263 card because it's such a stacked card. But I'm going to go with Lauren Murphy versus Joanne Calderwood. The reason why I'm going to go with that fight is I could see whoever wins that fight, and it's way down the card as of right now. It's way down the card. It's not. I don't even think it's. I think it's one of the early prelims or one of the first prelims on the actual prelims. And that just shows you how stacked the card actually is, because normally it would be higher up the card. But to me, this is such an intriguing matchup because Calderwood, who almost had the title shot in hand, or did have the title shot in hand, who had it ripped away from her because she ends up taking a fight because she needs to get paid, and gets submitted by Jennifer Maia, and then Maya gets the title shot against Valentina Shevchenko. She's not too far away from that. She got to win the last time out. Now she gets Lauren Murphy, who Murphy's really boisterous, very loud right now about she wants a title shot. Whoever wins this matchup could get the title shot. Is there going to be women ahead of them? Yes. But most of the women ahead of them have lost to Valentina Shevchenko. And I'm not saying either of them beat Shevchenko or go put up a fight or make it a great fight or be competitive at all. But I just think whoever wins this fight, though, they could be next in line for that title shot against Valentina Shevchenko. So I think there's a lot of intrigue there for me, too, between Lauren Murphy and Joanne Calderwood of who wants it more, who's more hungry in this matchup. Because both these women, even though Calderwood got tripped up a little bit, both these women very deserving of a title shot at some point. So very excited about that. Again, Adesanya Vettori, Figueiredo Moreno, Lima, Amasov, Shields, Elkins, and then Murphy Calderwood, the ones I'm really watching. But there's so many more. And I'm excited to see Shakur Stevenson back in the ring, boxing ring. So much to look forward to and so much to cover right here later this week on the Man in the Cage MMA and Combat Sports Podcast. All right, everybody, coming up next, somebody I haven't had on the show yet. I'm excited to bring him on. He is Tom Albano from fansided.com. He's an MMA contributor over there. We're going to go over everything from UFC Vegas 28 on Saturday, Logan Paul, Floyd Mayweather on last night's Sunday night was a great thing for boxing. Did Logan Paul have the better perception? Perceptionals coming out of that from the fans. We're going to go over all of that and start to turn the page, as I just did a little bit, to this weekend's action, this upcoming end of the week action for PFL, Bellator, Invicta, UFC, boxing, Shakur Stevenson in action, all that stuff that's coming up right now as Tom Albano joins me via Zoom. Great to welcome on the show right now via Zoom to help me make further sense of everything we had from this past weekend. He is Tom Albano from Fansided. You can go follow Tom on Twitter at Thomas J. Albano. Tom is an MMA contributor over at fansided.com. So go check out all of his work right now and, of course, all of his future work to come. And Tom, as I bring you on the program here, and I started the show out with this today. I started episode 93 with this. What a time to be alive as a combat sports fan, right? I mean, this past weekend we had UFC Vegas 28, so, a lot of good MMA fights. And then last night we had a YouTuber walking to the ring with a diamond-plated Charizard Pokemon card around his neck, fighting maybe the greatest, or of course one of the, even if you don't think he is the greatest, boxers of all time, and Floyd Mayweather. This is a crazy time to be alive as a combat sports fan. How you feeling today, man? How you feeling coming off of a fight weekend like we just had?
It was a crazy weekend, and it's going to be a crazy time coming up. I mean, we had a whole slew of events, week after week. Then we had the Memorial Day weekend where it was just nothing, which was like strange for the combat sports world. And now we're about to have heated up summer. Like you said, we had the two cards this past weekend, PFL, Bellator, UFC, all this weekend. We still have plenty of big fights like McGregor-Poirier coming up. And, it's an exciting time. Last weekend was, let's say, a very strange weekend. Rozenstruik versus Sakai maybe isn't the strongest of UFC cards, but, and maybe it ended up being not one of the strongest cards, but we ended up having a fight of the year candidate on one of them. It's like, you never know what these prelim or undercard fighters are going to do. Sometimes it's like, that's when the best fights come out. And then last night was just, from the Showtime app having so many problems to just the fight itself. And like you said, the kind of concept of the fight that it is, the YouTuber Logan Paul taking on, which I agree. Like, even if you don't think Floyd Mayweather is the greatest fighter of all time, he has to be one of the greatest.
Exactly, yeah.
And it's just, what a weird and wild weekend that we had.
It is, and that's why it was weird, and that's why today I'm wearing my Sean O'Malley tie-dye shirt, because it was the only shirt I could wear for the podcast today that would represent the mood coming out of what we saw last night with everything with Floyd Mayweather versus Logan Paul. And we're going to get to that a second, Tom, and I'll get your full thoughts on it. We'll dive deeper into all of that, but we will start out with that UFC Vegas 28 main event that you just talked about. Jairzinho Rozenstruik, he goes in there, he knocks out Augusto Sakai. Both guys kind of vying for that top 5 heavyweight spot. Rozenstruik now getting that knockout win. You would think that he either stays at 6 at the very least, or he's probably going to move up a couple spots here into the top 5. So a big win for Jairzinho Rozenstruik. What were your thoughts on that win from Rozenstruik? What'd you like from what you saw from him, and what impressed you the most about that performance against Augusto Sakai?
So I actually wasn't too surprised with Rozenstruik getting a kind of an early win. First of all, it was a performance that he absolutely needed. The fight against Gane, kind of boring, but Gane kind of fought the fight that he needed. And it's like, if you criticize Gane for that fight that Rozenstruik fought last, I mean, Rozenstruik, well, now it's the second to last performance, you would have had to like dig right into him about how terrible he looked. So it was a performance and a knockout that he absolutely needed. And he was taking on Sakai. And the thing about Augusto Sakai is, at the very least, Rozenstruik, we know, can compete on the very big level. The knockout of Overeem, managing to be in there with Francis Ngannou, as long, he lasted only 20 seconds, but the fact that he actually got that fight, Sakai, he was just getting these kind of big fights. Like, I know he has the win over Arlovsky, but you know what? Rozenstruik has a 30-second knockout of Arlovsky in Madison Square Garden. So, I mean, he kind of tops him in that one. And I'm looking at the win streak that Sakai entered right now. He had, Sherman, Arlovsky, Tybura, Ivanov. Then he had the loss to Overeem, and now this loss to Rozenstruik. We haven't seen Sakai get that kind of big win, and he hasn't had the opportunity really for a big fight. And now he's just had 2 in a row, and he's come up quite short in both of them. I know he lasted 5 rounds with Overeem, but you could tell, like, by the midway point, maybe even just second round, it seemed like Overeem was completely in control of that fight. And now here, yeah, I mean, the fight was kind of a little slow to start. I know Rozenstruik sometimes likes to focus on the counterattack. I mean, you see what he did to Overeem, going back to that last second knockout. And now here we have another last second round. I'll admit this wasn't at the very last seconds of the fight. It was the last seconds of the first round. But he has stated in his post-fight comments, he heard the clapper, basically 10 seconds. He's like, oh, well, now I got to turn it up. And boom, boom, boom. And then all of a sudden, Sakai was down on the ground. Yeah. So, yeah, Rozenstruik, this was a big rebound performance, big victory from him. Where he goes next, I mean, like you said, it's kind of tough because...
Well, that's going to be my next question. Well, part of one of my next questions to you, because, you looked at what Rozenstruik did in this fight. And as you said, he tries to look to counter sometimes. And there were a couple times early in that first round where Rozenstruik was looking to throw a big counter left hand, looking to do what he was doing in the past. But my biggest problem with him has just been that it's okay. It's all great and well to counter, but sometimes in order to win fights, you're going to have to come forward just a little bit. And especially against Sakai, who Sakai does so well pushing his opponents back to the fence, pushing his opponents back to the cage, using pressure. But Rozenstruik, it's like halfway through that first round, or, at the end of that first round, he decided, well, maybe I should start pushing this guy back. He's a little uncomfortable. I'm going to go after, I'm going to get him a little bit because he's not coming to me with the counters I want. So that really impressed me from Rozenstruik in this fight, that he did that. He pushed forward, cut off the octagon, finds that knockout at the end of the first round. But I mean, what is next for him now after a win like this? Because yeah, he does have losses to guys like Francis Ngannou, but I mean, Ngannou's got worldly power, obviously. He went out there and melted him within 20 seconds. So
I mean,
it wasn't like he went 5 rounds with him. So I mean, what is next for Rozenstruik here? And probably this top 5, could it be a Cyril Gane versus Alexander Volkov loser of that fight? Could it be something like that in your opinion?
I could see it. And yeah, first of all, Francis Ngannou, I mean, he is the heavyweight champion of the world right now. So that's not exactly a bad loss to have. But his positioning, you're right, it does leave him in a kind of a conundrum, because under him right now, I'm looking at the rankings, is Shamil, who, I'm not sure about, because Rozenstruik, like I said, like we've been saying, it has to be a top 5 next. Walt Harris, obviously he's going to go down in the ranks. Sakai's going to go down in the ranks. Marcin Tybura is going to move up in the ranks. I don't know what exactly is going to be next for Tybura. It's like interesting trying to it's like the pieces of a puzzle now here at the heavyweight scene, because it's all kind of booked up. That's the problem here, is that the top 5 is all booked. But for the most part, you got Lewis, who's going to challenge Ngannou next, and you have to think maybe Stipe would get the winner of that for his rematch, unless something goes on with John Jones. But I mean, as of right now, it seems like that John Jones UFC talks are still kind of in the water without a paddle anywhere to move up or downstream. Gane, yeah, I mean, the Gane Volkov fight I think is going to be interesting, and I think that's the perfect fight for Gane next. To judge exactly where he's at, and maybe see if Volkov, after knocking out, I believe it was Overeem, sending him out of the UFC, where he stands. And yeah, I could see very well the loser, like if Gane loses, maybe they do some sort of rematch there. Curtis Blades, we've heard nothing from Curtis Blades as far as I know. So
Yeah.
you know what? That now my mind is going. Now I see Curtis Blades' name. Like, Rozenstruik versus Blades might actually be interesting because, like we mentioned, Gane, in his fight with Rozenstruik, pretty much took him down, and Rozenstruik had no answer. Overeem, he basically had no answer until that last second knockout. Although, as much as Blades has these great wrestling abilities, he's been rocked quite a few times. Ngannou knocked him out. Lewis knocked him out in what I think is probably one of the biggest upsets so far of 2021 in the UFC. So you know what? Maybe you test the two of them. Test Rozenstruik's ability now to, take on a grappler, a wrestling expert like Blades, and see if Blades, can step up to the challenge and work on his chin a little bit by putting him against Rozenstruik and, bringing up that counter, how much he likes to counter Rozenstruik. Maybe that's a fight where we do need to see, as you mentioned, him on the front foot, him being aggressive, be aggressive, and see if he can have that kind of breakout performance that could say, you know what, maybe Rozenstruik, maybe we can throw him now in with Stipe. Maybe we can consider him for the championship or a rematch with Ngannou. That, now I look at Curtis Blades' name, something's going in my head that might be an interesting next matchup for him.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, like I said, I think the loser Volkov Gane would be interesting, but who knows after that what the UFC wants to do. They got John Jones still floating around out there. I really think Rozenstruik's probably when they update these rankings, I think he's going to go up to number 5. I think Blades will probably drop down to number 6. So I think that would make a lot of sense. Number 6 versus the 5 there. Volkov's ahead of those guys. He's facing a top 3 guy. And at that point, you still have Derek Lewis, who's getting his title fight later this summer. Stipe Miocic hanging out there waiting for another matchup with Ngannou or John Jones at some point against. That makes a lot of sense to me to be able to do that, the number 5 versus the number 6 in that spot. Now, my other part of that question of what's next versus Rozenstruik, and this is actually a larger question about both of these men, Augusto Sakai and Jairzinho Rozenstruik. And I think there's an easy answer that you could give, overreaction Monday here, a day after, or overreaction a couple days after the fights here, of whose stock you would like more. But I'm going to ask you this because it's one of the questions I'm throwing around on the show today is, which stock would you rather invest in moving forward? Would it be Rozenstruik, who again, he got the win over Sakai, so that's kind of the easy answer right now, or would you still consider Augusto Sakai, who, yeah, he's lost 2 in a row, but 2 losses in a row to Overeem and Rozenstruik, again, not, you can't write them off completely yet. So moving forward, would you be willing to invest in Sakai's stock still, or does it have to be Rozenstruik after this win over Augusto Sakai?
Okay, so the answer obviously right now is Rozenstruik, but Sakai, I like where you're going with that. Like, you can't exactly write him off because yes, he has the losses, and the losses are to legitimate talent. Like I said before, though, like I'm still looking for that one big performance from Sakai, and judging where he is, like he's number 9, he's probably going to move down because Tybura was ranked number 11, so he'll probably drop down into the bottom portion of those rankings. So he'll be surrounded by guys like Dawkins and Ivanov and Aspinall. He's beaten Ivanov before, so you look at Sakai about what could be next. Maybe he takes on that up-and-comer in Dawkins, or he takes on another up-and-comer in Aspinall, and maybe it's one of those performances where the UFC could be setting up, him to take the fall for one of these up-and-comers, but then he surprises and beats one of them, and it's like, oh, all of a sudden, maybe now we're back on the Sakai train. So yeah, you can't exactly write Sakai off right now, but the obvious answer is Rozenstruik because Rozenstruik, with the victory that he had, the last second first round knockout, that's kind of setting him up for one of these big guys. And he sets himself up where now if he beats a Curtis Blades, or he beats the loser of Volkov and Cyril, and he does it in the kind of fashion that he is known for doing, or if it's not a first round knockout, if we can see some improvements in his craft, improvements in grappling, improvements in cardio, and we see all these improvements and all these another big performance from him, then all of a sudden with Rozenstruik, it becomes top 3, it becomes maybe contenders fight, it becomes maybe title shot. Like, it's weird to say with Rozenstruik because it feels like he just got on the scene. He was only a UFC rookie in 2019, and he had a hell of a rookie year. I think us at Fanside had named him our rookie of the year for 2019 because of how well he did. And it's just, right now with Rozenstruik, obviously it's the easy answer, and I'm not running off Sakai right now, but Rozenstruik, with the kind of victory that he has, I think if you're going to invest in somebody from this card, it's definitely Jairzinho Rozenstruik.
Yeah, and that's why, again, and that's why I think it's a fascinating question, because you have to say Rozenstruik right now, but Sakai, I'm not, I think that he could still make a run at some point, just because of, you watch how he fights and the things he has to improve on. Because again, he has some things he's got to improve on. He's very uncomfortable when he's being pushed back. The Overeem fight showed that off, where when he was coming forward on Overeem, he was winning every single exchange almost. When he was going backwards, including this one against Rozenstruik, he looked very uncomfortable. His footwork looked very clunky. So, if he cleans up some of these things, again, these guys are heavyweights. He's not extremely old yet. Sakai is, I believe he's 30 years old or in his early 30s here. So it's, he could make the improvements, make a run at some point. Someone like, and I'm going to get into the next fight here, transitioning into the co-main event, maybe he makes a run like a Marcin Tybura here as we transition into, as I said, into the co-main event here. But Sakai, I'm not willing to write him off completely yet. And I still might be willing to buy some stock in him right now. But it should be an interesting one moving forward. And as I said, Tybura in the co-main event of the evening, another heavyweight. He gets another win over Walt Harris in this one, gets the TKO victory. And are you surprised at all the run that Marcin Tybura has been on? Because you look at it, I go back to November of 2017. He was at one point, 1-4 in his last 5 fights. He had 2 fights in a row. He lost to Derek Lewis, Fabricio Verdum. He did win one over Struve, but then he lost to Shamil. Then he also lost to Augusto Sakai. But now since then, though, he's got 5 fights in a row. He's won 5 fights in a row. He had a great 2020. He's continuing that into 2021. Are you surprised at all the run we're seeing from Marcin Tybura here?
Very, actually. Well, first of all, my heart breaks for Walt Harris. I assume we're going to get a little more into Walt Harris.
I'll get into Walt in a second.
My heart breaks for him.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
But it can't be ignored. Like we were just saying, it can't be ignored. A 5-fight win streak like he's had, because I basically was writing him off for dead around 2017, because he comes into the UFC after this hype from M1 where he's the heavyweight champion of the world over there. And then let's see here. He ends up having the first loss to Timothy Johnson, but then beats Pesta, beats Henrique, beats Andrei Arlovsky, and then he gets set up with Fabricio Verdum. So that's all the ultimate test. Like if he beats Verdum, all of a sudden he's in there. He loses to Verdum, not the end of the world. Loses to Derek Lewis, not the end of the world. He beats Stefan Struve, okay. But then, like you mentioned, the losses to Shamil and Sakai in 2019, and it's like, and Sakai, keep in mind, was not the top 10, top 15 ranked heavyweight at the time. And it's like, all of a sudden, maybe these doubts are setting in, and like maybe he's going to be one of these heavyweights that's always, the setup for another heavyweight to get a highlight or to break into the top 15. But then he beats Spivak. Okay, beats Maxim Grishin again. Okay, but we're not exactly making too much progress. Beats Ben Rothwell. Not exactly the Ben Rothwell, of 2016, but Ben Rothwell is a noted name. We're talking about Sakai and how he still needs to find the noted name and get the win over them. Well, there's your noted name for Tybura. Then he gets booked against Greg Hardy, and everyone, including myself, was thinking classic UFC promotion of Greg Hardy, where they're just going to give him somebody like on this win streak like Tybura is, and Hardy's just going to, because Hardy has all the power in the world, whether you love him or hate him. And we think, okay, Greg Hardy's going to run through him. Instead, he manages to keep the fight going, stay in the fight, and Hardy just tires out, and then all of a sudden Marcin Tybura gets the big TKO, and all of a sudden it's strange because you'd think Ben Rothwell is the bigger name in the sport than Greg Hardy, but obviously Greg Hardy is the bigger name in sports. So because of that win, that's when everyone's eyes start lighting up, like, 4-fight win streak, beat Ben Rothwell, beat Greg Hardy, who was a big Dana White guy, and now a win over Walt Harris, who was ranked higher than him, a top 10 heavyweight. And now he's going to be breaking into the top 10. I think, Tybura is one of the nicest surprises we've had over the last couple of years here in the UFC. And time will tell if he's going to last with the top 10. But, next for him has got to be a big name fight.
Yeah, I mean, and you looking around the rankings, speaking of that, we've done that a lot so far, but, even Sakai sitting there at number 9, you think Sakai's probably going to drop, but, he's still a somewhat big name, obviously, coming off of this fight. So, he's still a hot prospect. So maybe, he's a name that the UFC throws in there with a Marcin Tybura, because you have Sakai, who needs a win here. You have Tybura with a lot of steam, momentum here. Maybe that would be something. Also, Shamil up there again. He's there. Chris Dawkins. So there's some options for Marcin Tybura, but he's going to get even a bigger name at some point here, moving forward in his UFC career. It'd be very interesting to see that. But you mentioned it a little bit at the beginning of the question. Let's get into Walt Harris a little bit too now. And as you said, your heart breaks for him. I mean, everything he's been through. I really believed in the guy this last week, because even the honesty that he was giving, where he was talking to the media about, how he admitted that in hindsight, he shouldn't have been fighting last year and that he probably rushed it a little too quick. I thought he would come into this fight and look a little different. And at first, first part of that first round, it looked like, yeah, maybe this is going to be the old Walt Harris. Maybe this is a focused Walt Harris. And again, who could blame him for being distracted from everything before? But you looked at him in the first part of the round, you're like, hey, Walt Harris he's not looking bad right now. And then like some of the fights recently that he struggled in, all of a sudden just crumbled again. And, Tybura gets him to the ground, gets that ground and pound going. What do you think's next for Walt Harris? Because, there's the UFC rule of 3 losses in a row, you get cut, right? He's lost 3 fights in a row now, all given to big names. I don't know if the UFC will cut him, especially because of everything he's been through. But what is next for Walt Harris? Do you think he could possibly be cut? Do they need to give him a gimme, if you will? Because they really haven't been easy on Walt Harris. That's the thing. I mean, Overeem, Volkov, Tybura, these are hard fights. I mean, what do you think's next for Walt in his UFC career here?
The funny thing is, though, like we talked about, maybe he rushed in too quick, about old Harris versus this current slate of Harris. If you watch those fights again, like this fight and the Overeem fight, he came close to finishing both fights. He came close to finishing Overeem until he tired out, and Overeem took advantage in that fight. And then he put on a hell of a performance. He had a strong start against Tybura, and just, again, nothing, once he started to tire out. So he's definitely got to work on his cardio. Definitely number 1. Yeah. Number 2, like I said, my heart breaks because I want him to get this rebound win. And it seems like the UFC wants to give him one of these big rebound wins. And as we mentioned, he was fighting top 10 heavyweights. He was a top 10 heavyweight. Now, does he fall out of the top 10? I mean, he's definitely going to fall. He's definitely going to fall. Right now he was ranked number 8, so he's definitely going to fall to, I could see 10, maybe 11, because Tybura is going to move up and probably move up ahead of him. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of tough because on one hand, UFC, this is a situation where I mentioned it before, but I could mention it again for Walt Harris's situation. Now you could pair him up with somebody like a Dawkins or an Aspinall, who's a up and comer, and kind of try to use Walt Harris's potential to give them the bigger rub. But Walt Harris, I think with his story, and not just for UFC promotional sake, but for I like Walt. I'm so heartbroken that he lost. I was really hoping that, this was going to be potentially that fight where he gets the big win. And, I think the UFC is going to want to continue to see if maybe he can get the win. Are they going to give him a gimme fight? I don't think so. I don't think, because he's still one of the top, he's still one of the better heavyweights in the scene. But, maybe, here's the thing, maybe don't book him for the next 3 months, 6 months. Give him more time off. Give him, half a year, 3/4 of a year to improve his game, improve his ground skills, improve his cardio. And when he feels ready, in terms of just mind, in terms of body, in terms of spirit, then you book him, and then you see what he's made of, and hopefully get him this kind of heartwarming rebound from tragedy kind of win.
Yeah, it's just so tough, as you said. I mean, you're probably gonna have to give him a little time off unless you throw him right back in there. And all these matchups are just murderers row. I mean, you talked about Tom Aspinall. I would say Alexei Oleinik, given how Alexei Oleinik's looked on his feet at times, striking. But we all know the ground game that Oleinik has. That's a nightmare matchup for Walt Harris. Plus, although he passes out, but Sorry?
Although he did knock out Oleinik, didn't he not?
Yes, he did already. But again, but would they do that matchup again? Probably not. So that's why this is becoming kind of a nightmare scenario. Chris Daukaus looking like he has a lot of promise. So I really don't know where they go with Walt Harris right away, as far as not even saying easy matchups, as you said, but like a matchup that he could definitely win. I see him losing all of these again, maybe.
That's why I say don't cut him. But, with the level of competition and his skills, maybe the best option is to take a little time off. Yeah. Well, not a little, take a lot of time off, a good 6 months, 9 months, even if we have to stretch it to a year before his next fight. Let's make sure Walt Harris is ready for, improving in his skills so he can get back into the top 10 and compete with some of these younger guys.
Yeah, and use that skill that he has and that explosiveness and that power, because when he is going, we saw it in the first part of the Overeem fight where it looked like he was just going to melt him and get out of there, win the fight within the first round there. And then, of course, he gasses out. Overeem comes back on him. So, yeah, I mean, hopefully Harris can figure some things out, because he does have some talent again. It's going back to even guys like Sakai. At some point in your UFC career, a lot of mixed martial artists, obviously, even boxers, in the game of combat sports in general, a lot of these guys will hit that little speed bump. They'll stub their toe a little bit. The question is, of course, after that, can you get over that again? Can you make those necessary improvements? And that'll be up to Walt Harris here. And hopefully they give him a bit of time, as his circumstance is a little different than most fighters. So hopefully the UFC goes with that. Now, speaking of a lot of promise here, Tom, we'll move to the Santiago Ponzinibbio versus Miguel Baeza fight. Just a sensational fight. I mean, both guys stayed in each other's faces. It looked like at times maybe Miguel Baeza was going to get a big knockout victory. Then at times it looked like Ponzinibbio moving forward was going to give the young kid a vet lesson. Ponzinibbio ends up getting that smallest of decisions over Baeza to get the win. What were your thoughts on that matchup? I think you talked about it a little bit earlier, but right now it's got to be up for fight of the year, right? It's got to be one of those candidates. And then this is one of those weird fights, right, where the fighter that lost, Miguel Baeza, you almost think his stock didn't go down, which is crazy after you lose, but it feels like it didn't go down. And we still learned at the same time that Ponzinibbio is still pretty badass, right? I mean, we learned that Ponzinibbio is still pretty badass, even though he lost to Li Jingliang his last time out. This one, he shows that. Miguel Baeza shows that he still has a lot of stock. And then maybe fight of the year, Tom. We'll be saying that at the end of the year.
I mean, we still have about 7 months to go. So,
yeah.
and the last fight that was, nominated in my head for fight of the year had also just recently happened. It was like Oliveira and Chandler. And I think that this fight blew it out of the water. You mentioned Baeza and about his stock not dropping. I just saw recently that he's on Instagram basically apologizing, for not getting the job done. That is not a performance in which you need to apologize.
Exactly.
That was a hell of a fight. Scorecards not going your way, like all three of them, 29-28 in favor of your opponent and Ponzinibbio, be damned. Baeza and Ponzinibbio put on a clinic. It was one of those fights. It was one of those bangers where basically, you say, you wonder why MMA fans aren't more into kickboxing, because that's one of those exciting kickboxing style fights where one's laying in on the other and then the other gets his shots in. One rocks the other, and it's just an absolutely fun fight. And, for a card like we had, because I know a lot of people weren't exactly excited for a card headlined by Rozenstruik and Sakai, this was the kind of fight that the card kind of needed, because obviously, there wasn't a lot of excitement going into this card. A lot of the prelims ended in decision. So this is one of those fights where, maybe it didn't end up with a knockout or a submission or anything like that, but, it was a hell of a fight. And Baeza has nothing to be ashamed of. Yeah. I mean, that was only his first professional loss. And you look at his stretch in the time that he's been in front of Dana White in the UFC, Reina on the Contender Series, Hector Aldana, TKO of Matt Brown, Takashi Sato. Those are fine fights. Those are fine victories. Yep. And now Santiago Ponzinibbio. I mean, at one point, he was one of the best welterweights in the world. Then he deals with the injury and all the infections, so we don't see him for a while. You mentioned Li Jingliang, where he ended up getting knocked out.
Yeah. And
that was not the performance that, he kind of needed. But a fight against Miguel Baeza, which is a fight of the year candidate, ends up getting the victory. Ponzinibbio's back. There's no question about it. Ponzinibbio is back. and he basically, maybe this is the fight now where we can start, the potential of the big comeback where, he's once again one day down these lines a top welterweight contender. I mean, think about, right before his injury. So he was competing 2017, 2018. The victories over, knockout of Gunnar Nelson, knockout of Neil Magny. He was on his way to potentially maybe top 5 to maybe top contender title shot. Yeah, who knows where Santiago Ponzinibbio would be if it wasn't for those injuries and those infections where he just had a long layoff.
Yeah, and that's why even going into this fight, I said it all last week that I was giving him, I mean, you got to go out and perform. A loss is a loss, but I was giving Ponzinibbio a little bit of a pass for that Li Jingliang fight because all the time, all the, the infections, as you said, the injuries, if you will, outside of the octagon, you had to give him a little bit of a pass there, as all of a sudden you're throwing in after all that ring rust, all that octagon rust on you, and you're told to go slug it out with Li Jingliang we've seen over the years. While maybe he hasn't been the most elite of fighters, although he's had some pretty big wins, he's still a very good fighter. So you have to give Ponzinibbio, I think, a little bit of a break for that. Still a very good
fighter. Still, like you said, noted names. He has victories over noted names. That's not a scrub that he's losing to.
Exactly. And, and again, the ring rust, he looked like he was having trouble pulling the trigger. Here, he definitely did not. He goes right after Miguel Baeza. Baeza, again, he was coming after him too, though. So Baeza should not be anywhere apologizing. He should just be saying, I'm here to stay. This is what you can expect from me, that I'm already going to go in there and push a veteran and a guy who could be a champion or could have been a champion even in the past had it not been for certain things, injuries, outside of his control a little bit. Maybe he've already been a champion. So Baeza has nothing to be ashamed of with that performance against Santiago Ponzinibbio, one of the better fights we have seen recently. But as you said, there's a lot of time left, so who knows? There's probably going to be some other barn burners at the midpoint and at the end of the year here on the UFC and Bellator and all mixed martial arts calendar, and in boxing too. I'll throw that in there. And speaking of boxing, let's get into it now. Let's move off of UFC Vegas 28, Tom. Let's get into Floyd Mayweather versus Logan Paul, the sideshow, the circus that it was last night. And obviously there was no judges scoring this. It was based off of if you get the knockout, you get the win. If not, it's it's an exhibition, obviously, but there's no judges scoring it. But in my opinion, I think you do have to come out of this matchup in just based off of perception and things like that. Do you think someone won this matchup based off of perception? Do you think somebody has the higher stock now? Because we know what Floyd is, and Floyd doesn't care. Floyd's going to go get paid. He already got paid. But do you think someone came out of this matchup, even though there wasn't judges, having a much higher opinion in the public, or at least winning that, that public interest category, if you will? Do you think someone came out of this matchup with that from last night?
Let me figure out the way to answer this question, because I had written in a tweet that in one of my articles for this fight, I basically had described this fight as one in which we all lose. And I mean,
we did last night. Everybody did.
Everybody did. Showtime did. The people who bought the fight and ended up having problems with Showtime did. But in seriousness, I mean, if you look at a fight as, a boxing match, which, I mean, yes, it was boxing in the ring, but it wasn't the true professional boxing match. But Floyd won the fight. And Jake Paul can go rant about, Floyd Mayweather is 50-1, even though it was an exhibition fight, and even though there was technically no winner or loser in this fight, just the fact that Floyd Mayweather went the distance and Logan Paul went the distance, that it's a 50-1, regardless of what Jake Paul says, Floyd Mayweather won that fight. But is this a victory in which, maybe he doesn't come out as good? I mean, because this fight reminded me of the McGregor fight, in which McGregor was getting his shots in. McGregor was getting off to a pretty good start. I always joke that Vegas and Atlantic City bookies were probably freaking out as McGregor was winning the first 3 or 4 rounds. Like, what's going on here? And then McGregor ends up tiring out, and Floyd ended up getting a 10th round TKO. And I thought we were going to get something similar, because Logan Paul was firing on all cylinders, trying to, swing wildly and get the knockout very early on. And by the time the 3rd round, 4th round came around, you could see him being gassed. So I thought, okay, here it comes. Floyd Mayweather's going to get the knockout. He's going to get the knockout. He's gonna get the knockout.
We're still waiting.
And then the 7th or 8th round, it's just like nothing happens, and it's like, well, there you have it. That's how the cookie crumbles.
I was about to say, yes. This just in: Floyd Mayweather still hasn't found that knockout from last night. A day later here, yeah, that was one of those things where, yeah, I mean, I was expecting him to do the same thing too, and I was watching with my wife, and I turned to her and I go, all right, Floyd's starting to swing now with some shots that he's trying to find that check hook. He's trying to find those punches to knock him out. It's going to happen. Sure enough, though, it does not happen. He does not get it. And that's why, yeah, did Floyd win if it went to decision, would Floyd have won the fight? Absolutely. He definitely won the fight. But as far as optics go, because the whole thing around this fight was for bragging rights. Well, if you're going to go by bragging rights, then the bragging rights is that Logan Paul can now tell his children that he went 8 rounds with Floyd Mayweather. Now, is Floyd in his 40s now? Is Logan much bigger? Where was it a 10-round fight, 12-round fight? Yeah, you can say all that, but still, I mean, Logan, he's got the bragging rights now a little bit, right? A day later, and he can go fight somebody else now. And Jake Paul, they can even look even more legitimate now after last night.
I like how one of the people over at MMA Fighting, I think it was Mookie, Mookie Alexander basically put it best. Think about this. Say what you will about it's 8 rounds, and it was an exhibition fight, so it technically doesn't count. Meanwhile, the money fight with Floyd and Conor was an actual professional boxing match. Just think about this concept. Saying this out loud. Logan Paul went the distance with Floyd Mayweather, but not a legitimate professional fighter like Conor McGregor. Does that not blow your mind just when you think about that concept?
It does. And you look at, and it's just, we're living in, I feel like the world is upside down right now. I just feel like I would never have seen a day, because I was asking everybody leading up to this fight, does Logan Paul stand any shot? And everybody I would ask, any guest I brought on the podcast here, and in my own prediction myself, it was laughing. It was like, no, he doesn't. Like Floyd can do whatever he wants. It's just, it's a spectacle, whatever. We'll have fun with it. But nobody was giving him a legitimate shot. And again, would he have lost the decision? Yes. I can't stress that enough, because the minute you don't say that, some Mayweather fan will come out and say, well, he won the fight technical. Yes, he did. But at the same time, you would think that one of the greatest, again, if not the greatest boxer of all time, or one of the greatest fighters in all of combat sports,
would want one more knockout.
Yeah, put away a YouTuber who wasn't fighting years ago. Logan Paul, I guess he's got an okay chin. We're kind of learning now. I don't know. I don't know if I believe that, though. I just don't know if maybe the age of Floyd Mayweather, and he's never had a ton of power anyway when he goes up in weight classes. I don't know what it is that he wasn't able to.
I think it ultimately comes down to the post-fight comments, because if you saw the post-fight comments, or Floyd is basically like, now he's just about putting on the show, and that, currency is going to put food on his family's table and not legacy.
Yeah.
That the only thing I'll throw at that one, because yes, it's an excellent point, but when he says that quote, all I can think of is back when he and McGregor were doing the press tours, and they're talking about all the money, and McGregor said that's for the tax man, because Floyd was being accused of not paying his taxes. And it's like, well, I mean, and it's not the first time that we've seen Floyd in an exhibition fight too. I think of Rizin, where he was in that special rules kickboxing without kicks match against a kickboxer, and ended up getting a first round TKO there. So,
which makes it even crazier again, that he went out there, he steamrolled him in that fight, and then he went out here and then he couldn't finish the YouTuber, which makes it even more crazy. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
No, perfect, because it's just it's insanity, because like you said, Floyd has said that maybe he doesn't. There won't be any more exhibition fights. And you know what? Maybe that's kind of for the best after this kind of performance. But now for the Paul brothers, I mean, we're not done. I think we're far from done.
Yes.
Because now Jake Paul's going to be fighting Tyron Woodley in a couple of months. And it's just, my fear is that, I get it. These fights will always make money. And, you can't say boxing is dead, because at the end of the day, financially, no, because now that, boxing took a hit last year with the COVID pandemic. We didn't have as many fights. But now with these YouTubers like the Paul brothers coming in and basically throwing money all over the place for the likes of, Showtime, DAZN, Triller, now the money's going to be everywhere. No, the sport is not dead. Now, spiritually, with a beating heart and everything, yeah, maybe we can have
Well, that's my next question for you, Tom, here. And then we will get to, and I have some questions for the future here, like UFC 263 this Saturday. We'll just get some of your thoughts there, even briefly in a second here about some of that coming up. But that was my next question here, because that's my other takeaway from this, because coming into all these YouTuber fights, even the one coming up between Jake Paul, Tyron Woodley, I had no problem with them now. Even though, am I a diehard combat sports fans? Do I kind of roll my eyes a little bit at it? Yes. But
big time.
But if it brings new fans, new eyes to the sport, I haven't had an issue with it. But for the first time last night, I actually find myself today a little bit going back to where I was before, where am I totally off this now? Do I think it's the worst thing in the world still? No, I don't think it is. But this morning, I'm definitely a little bit more in the camp of, well, does this demean the sport of boxing a little bit? Like, what is this? What is Floyd going the distance with? And I know knockouts aren't everything all the time, but, what does this say about the sport now that one of the greatest of all times, albeit in his 40s, can't put away a YouTuber here? And then you have another YouTuber taking over the game. And, he's out there calling Canelo out today, saying Canelo can't sell pay-per-views. Jake Paul is. He looks like he's going to try to set up a fight with Canelo, even though Canelo will probably never fight him, obviously.
No.
He shouldn't. But, what does this say about the sport, in your opinion? I mean, where's your stance on this? Do you think this is a good thing? Do you think it demeans it? Or do you think it just is what it is and they'll eventually go away at some point?
Well, first of all, you mentioned bringing new fans to the sport, and it's like, technically, yes, we're getting, say, somebody who hasn't been in boxing. We aren't exactly, we're getting their money for something like, the one of the Paul brothers fighting, just because it's like, one of the Paul brothers, I watch him on YouTube all the time, so you know what, I'll buy the fight just because I'm interested. And that's my fear, is that maybe these new eyes, these new eyes in the sport are only being attracted to the Paul brothers. And let's say down the line, Logan and Jake say, you know what, we're retiring from the YouTube game, we're retiring from the boxing game. And then all of a sudden, these new eyes, aren't going to be attracted to somebody like a Canelo or an Anthony Joshua or a Teofimo Lopez. So then, you can't exactly call them hooked onto the sport or new eyes on the sport if they're not going to be actually following the sport, the guys who are going for the championship belts. Yeah. And on the flip, on the other side of things, where we're talking about the fact that Mayweather couldn't finish Logan Paul, I mean, in a way, because it's tough, because freak show fights have always been a part of combat sports.
Yeah.
But they've always been kind of like specials. Like Floyd Conor was big because we hadn't seen it before, and in everybody's mind, we were thinking, maybe we'll never see this again. So it was treated as like a big one-time thing, because we had never seen the biggest star in MMA at a time face the biggest star in boxing at a time. And we were thinking, could this be a thing down the road? Because it's very rare to see somebody like a Dana White co-promote like that. And, so maybe we'll never see it again, or if we do see it again, it won't be for a while. The biggest example that was going through my head as I'm trying to figure out this question, after last night, just going through all my thoughts, is Antonio Inoki. When he and Muhammad Ali fought in the 1970s, Antonio Inoki fought Muhammad Ali. Then Muhammad Ali didn't go and fight any more professional wrestlers. And Antonio Inoki, as far as I know, he didn't go fight Joe Frazier and George Foreman next.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, it seems like the Paul brothers are trying to make a career out of freak show fights, which, somebody I had brought this up. I think it was one of the guys from The Athletic, the MMA portion of The Athletic. Like, if this was a fight that was held in, say, Ryzen or the old Pride Fight champion, would we be really loving it? Because some of like Ryzen and Pride were into the freak show fights. But that's the thing about the freak show fights, is like, they're not bad for the sport. They're big money draws. Logan, Jake Paul are obviously going to be big money draws in combat sports right now. But, it should be a rarity. It shouldn't be a whole career made out of it. And it seems like I said, it seems last night, like, so remember the old celebrity boxing show? Yeah. How it would always be like, an occasional thing, freak show fights. It seems like that's becoming the norm and the mainstream of boxing, more than, say, a guy like a Canelo or a Tyson Fury or an Anthony Joshua. And that's, and you can't blame all of boxing's problems on the Paul brothers. Sorry to keep rambling on here, but
no, you're good.
To throw one more point here, all of boxing's problems. Yeah, you can say boxing isn't dead, and because you point to the financials, you can say boxing is dead, and talk about how the Mayweather-Paul fight is like demeaning to the sport. But you can't say everything is about the Paul brothers. I mean, just look at the heavyweight championship scene. We have been trying for years to get the championships unified, the WBA and the WBC. First, when it was with Anthony Joshua and Deontay Wilder. Then when Joshua had his upset loss, it was with Ruiz and Wilder, and that became Joshua Wilder again. Now it's Joshua and Fury, and we thought we were close to getting an undisputed champion, and now we have to see a third fight between Fury and Wilder. And now we got to see Joshua and Usyk because of the WBO mandation. And who knows, even if Joshua and Fury get their jobs done, maybe the WBA comes in and says, hey, you know what? No, Anthony, you got to fight somebody else. It's like boxing gets in its own way. Yeah. That's the problem. It's not just the Paul brothers. It's so many other things in the politics of boxing where it's just, you can't use the Paul brothers as a scapegoat. You can say they're part of the problem, but you can't use them as the full scapegoat.
No, you can't. And that's why it's kind of been cracking me up this past week that, is there issue with fighter pay in MMA? Yes, there is an issue with fighter pay sometimes. I would say that a lot of fighters should get paid more. But I'm listening to Jake Paul this last week, and he's basically summing things up to, if everything was like boxing and what I'm doing right now, and you just pay fighters, hey, Ngannou and Miocic, and, not Ngannou Miocic, but, Ngannou Jones, these fights these would already be happening. And it cracked me up because I'm like, do you know the history of boxing? Do you know what's going on in the sport right now, Jake Paul, that we haven't had the heavyweight fights? We haven't had those there either. And those guys are all getting a lot of money to go fight in whatever fight they're in. So yeah, I mean, there's so many different issues of boxing right now that I do think these fights do bring something, but I do think they detract a little bit, but it's not the whole issue though. We could probably do a whole 24-hour show on what the issues of boxing are.
It's like breaking, on one hand, it's like breaking news. The person you hate the most makes one of the best points possible. But on the flip, I don't think he understands that, some of the problems that we're seeing, like with the UFC about, maybe the best fighters aren't fighting and that the UFC isn't co-promoting with, other promotions like Bellator, and we're not seeing the champion of one promotion take on the champion of another. It's plagued boxing too. I talked about this with James Lynch last year during the pandemic era. Well, I mean, we're still in the pandemic, but when the UFC was starting to get things going again with the pandemic era, and you saw all these retirements left and right from Cejudo, Conor had his third retirement, Nunes, there were rumors about her, and of course John Jones. And I had made this point where basically you can't just go and extend the Ali Act into mixed martial arts, because we have seen in boxing that there's still a number of pitfalls. You can't take the boxing model and put it completely into MMA. There's got to be all these, specifications and all these changes. We need to make sure that if we extend the Ali Act into, say, MMA and try to get, what boxing has, the good stuff that boxing has that MMA doesn't into MMA, we got to make sure we secure up, and clean up all the pitfalls and all the traps that boxing has, all the bad stuff that boxing has, to make sure that MMA is a better sport and we can have the money that we see in boxing and MMA.
Yeah, because that's really the biggest issue, obviously. I mean, yes, do we get the cross-promotional things? What I love to see in Bellator, what I love to see Vadim Nemkov take on Glover Teixeira, or, Nemkov versus Jan Blachowicz here. Absolutely. But at the end of the day, though, there are these promotions that have built good stable of fighters. So you are seeing a lot of competitive fights. It's just the money problem that should these fighters be getting paid more for that? Should Francis Ngannou have gotten paid very rich to fight Stipe Miocic? Yeah, he should have. I mean, that should have been a fight.
Be able to use, co-promotion. I guess co-promotion, but it's like as leverage. Hey, Dana, you're not going to give me a fight, a big money fight for, this championship defense. Maybe I'll go to Bellator with Scott and we'll work something out and, defend championship, fight champion versus champion there or something. Yeah. Like, we need something like that, because we don't have that kind of problem where the best aren't fighting the best. We don't have the mandatory challenger problem, and I do have the kind of fear, if we leave it in independent bodies, hands, things can get messy. But like I said, it goes back to maybe there is a way where we can bring the big money that boxing has into MMA, especially considering MMA's popularity, and growing mainstream presence with ESPN and all that. But we got to cover all the pitfalls first.
We do, for sure. And that's why there's issues in every sport. MMA might have, we'll say, a fewer ones just right now as far as finding the right fights, putting the right matchmaking together at times, maybe. But still, yeah, I mean, there's issues there in both boxing and mixed martial arts that it'll be interesting to see. And the promoters, well, I mean, Dana White and them, they probably have no interest in changing anything right now. I mean, why would you? If you're making a lot of money, if you're the UFC, you're not going to make many changes. Now, if they start to lose money, if the popularity of the sport starts to go down, things happen, then we'll see if Dana White and some of these other guys, Scott Coker, want to go to, I don't know, find some independent bodies or make some sort of commission or something else on the side. I don't know. We'll see in the future for MMA, and then, of course, boxing as well. All right, Tom, just a few more for you, then I'll get you out of here. And it's been great interviewing you today, man. Thanks for jumping on with me. Let's move ahead a little bit to this weekend, and we'll get specifically into the main event, co-main of UFC 263 in a second here. But we do have a lot coming up this week. We have PFL on Thursday. We've got Bellator 260 on Friday night. As I just mentioned, UFC 263 on Saturday night. And then we also have Shakur Stevenson. He's returning to action this Saturday as well in boxing. So I'll just throw this at you real quick because I'm going to go over some of the fights going into this fight week today on the show that I'm looking forward to. But, what are 1 or 2, 3 fights out of all these cards you're really looking forward to coming up this week?
Well, I was going to say, I guess the obvious answer for me, you look at UFC 263, and honestly, I think I'm a little more excited for the co-main event than I am for the main event.
Figueiredo Moreno, yeah.
Figueiredo Moreno.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was probably the runner-up for Fight of the Year in 2020. Obviously, I had, and Fansided did give Joanna and Weili that big Fight of the Year thing. But I mean, Figueiredo Moreno, I was just watching that fight. I was rewatching it earlier today, and it's like, I had it as a draw the night that I was scoring it, because I said the draw is kind of the right decision, because there were plenty of rounds where I was like, I'm not even sure who won. I watched that fight again, and it's like, yeah, no, I'm still not sure. I really am still not sure who won that fight, because that was absolutely insanity. And I mean, Adesanya Vettori, in my opinion, Adesanya clearly won their first meeting. Yeah, I don't know where Vettori's getting the idea. Like, he had his fair share of shots in that first fight, but it was still Adesanya's win. And Nate Diaz, as much as Nate Diaz is a money draw,
yeah,
this is the first time we're seeing him since the loss to Masvidal. And Leon Edwards, he's had his own fair share of inactivity before the no contest with Bilal. So, considering those circumstances and considering what's going on with Figueiredo Moreno from the first time, I think that's definitely one you got to watch out for. Another one I think you got to watch out for is I think the prelim headliner, Drew Dober and Brad Riddle. Obviously, Brad Riddle training with Israel Adesanya and the likes, and Drew Dober, who definitely is an up-and-comer in the lightweight division. He was always around, but now he's starting to really break through. This is definitely that kind of fight where, you got to keep your eyes on. PFL 4, I think the biggest talking point when it comes to PFL 4, even bigger than Anthony Pettis being the headliner, is Clarissa Shields. The fact that she is debuting, and the fact that she's, we're talking about boxing and MMA, and we're talking about, maybe bringing one sports, not their pitfalls, but what makes the sport so good. And now we're seeing a start, because it's funny, because we're talking about all the money that's being thrown around for the heavyweight champions, and Francis Ngannou's getting pretty pissed off seeing the kind of money that Paul and Mayweather are making. But then we have Clarissa Shields going over to mixed martial arts because she has a better chance of getting money in mixed martial arts than in boxing.
Exactly. She has a better shot of getting a super fight. And that's the problem with one of the other problems of boxing right now, is that there's a lot of good women's fighters in boxing, but they haven't been promoted correctly. And, the sport has some different rules. Sometimes it's obviously working a little different. So yeah, Clarissa Shields, I'm excited to see her make her debut on this Thursday's PFL card because, you could be talking, obviously Kayla Harrison also in PFL, which could be a big talking point in the future for Cyborg or Amanda Nunes. But same thing with Clarissa Shields here, that, if Shields is able to go out there and have some success. Now, I'm very skeptical that long-term, because it's just, we've seen it. No matter what sport you're in, it's just so hard to go pick something up all of a sudden and beat elite or good enough at it to beat even at some point average fighters. Now, I think at first year against Brittany Elkin, we'll see again. She's going to get tripped out, but maybe she wins these first couple ones. Maybe she has some highs and some lows, but is able to get through them. But I am skeptical at some point if she does trip up. But, if she is able to keep working and maybe she shocks me here and she keeps working at Jackson Winklejohn, she's doing all the things she needs to do, maybe we could see an Amanda Nunes fight. So it's a huge talking point on this PFL card. And even though some MMA fans out there will kind of roll their eyes at it as that being the biggest fight on PFL this weekend on the Thursday, I do think that is. It's going to be a big fight. The Bellator card's going to be really good. You talked about 263 there, the main event, the co-main event. So many good fights coming up this weekend, and we'll leave it right there. I'll give you two more, and then we'll get out of here. Who are you taking in Adesanya Vettori? Do you think Adesanya wins once again? I had him winning the first fight too. Like you said, Vettori said that he pushed him in that fight, or maybe should have won the fight. I disagree with him there. I think he did push him in that fight harder than anybody had pushed him before Jan Blachowicz. But it still he wasn't winning the fight. So do you have Adesanya there versus Vettori? And then in the co-main event, Devison Figueiredo, Brandon Moreno, who do you have between those guys? And do you think it's going to be another slugfest? I guess that's another question too. Do you think it could be another fight of the year candidate between those two?
To go on to the last question, by the way, I do have one more I want to throw in because I do want to give Bellator some love. Paul Daly versus Jason Jackson.
Absolutely.
That's just Jason Jackson. I think he should get a title shot after that win over Neiman Gracie. But the fact that he's facing Paul Daly now, and Paul Daly he had the retirement rumors, but he seems like now he doesn't want to slow down, even though he's competing at 175 catch weights. If Jason Jackson beats Paul Daly, and I think he does, I think you got to give him a title shot next.
I agree. That's another fight I circled in the main event of Bellator too. Douglas Lima versus Amasov. That's going to be a good fight as well for the welterweight title. Yeah, so there's some definitely good fights on that Bellator 260 card for sure.
Okay, so for UFC 263, Israel Adesanya and Marvin Vettori. I was kind of going off on the part. I see Adesanya winning this fight. It's not that I don't give Marvin Vettori no chance, but like his biggest wins are what? Kevin Holland.
Yeah.
Kevin Holland was his most recent win, and then Jack Hermanson. Fair, but look at the guys Adesanya was fighting. He was fighting Kelvin Gastelum in the 2019 fight of the year. He had to go through Derek Brunson in late November of 2018 at the Garden. He had to defeat Robert Whittaker for the Undisputed Championship. And, maybe Whittaker wasn't ready for that fight, but the fact that it's Robert Whittaker, who's still, I think Whittaker and Adesanya are still the two best middleweights in the UFC, if not all of MMA today. Yoel Romero, maybe that fight was kind of boring, but
still beat him.
Beat him.
Win's a win. That's Yoel's fault as far as I'm concerned.
I agree.
You got to you got to go press the guy a little bit. Even though you're scared of those counters, you got to go press the guy a little bit if you're Yoel.
And Paulo Costa, first of all, if he was drinking the wine box, he should not have been in that fight. But regardless, just the fact that Paulo Costa, again, like Yoel Romero, is big, and the fact that he's making 185 pounds can seem insane to some, and Adesanya just and just dusted him off completely, no contest. That just goes to show you the skill of Adesanya. And the fact that he's just getting better. Yeah, maybe he's not undefeated anymore because he went up to light heavyweight and lost to Jan Blachowicz, but Jan Blachowicz is the light heavyweight champion of the world. He's on a hot streak himself, and he's about to defend the championship against Glover Teixeira. With a win there, all of a sudden, you got to consider Jan Blachowicz pretty serious. I think you have to consider him pretty serious just for the fact that he beat Adesanya. So I think, Adesanya is just getting better. He's not slowing down anytime soon, in spite of the loss. Adesanya is one of those guys where it's you have to see the slowdown like we saw the slowdown of Jones, or we have to see the defeat in order to, like what happened with Rousey, to say that, something's wrong with Adesanya. Until then, it's kind of hard to pick against Adesanya. And in this case, with how he clearly won the first fight, despite all the attempts at revisionist history. You know, I will even go one step further. I don't even think this fight's going to the championship rounds. I think Adesanya is just so improved as of late that I think second round, maybe third round, I think second round, maybe third round. I think first round's a possibility, but I think that's too crazy. But second round, third round, I think Adesanya could get the job done and get the finish with how evolved he is.
I think so too, and I'll let you get to Figueiredo and Moreno in a second here. But one of the things that impresses me the most about Adesanya since he's come to the UFC, and has he suffered a ton of losses? No, but I feel like we've always had this mountain of momentum, this wave of momentum with Adesanya, where he'll have a bad, boring fight, and then he comes out the next fight out, and he looks fantastic, and he looks like he's the most exciting guy in all of combat sports, and then he'll go out there and he'll struggle a little bit, right? He'll get the job done maybe, but or maybe he'll trip up like the last time, even though he went up a weight class. But then I feel like the next time out, he always gets out there and he gets after it a little bit more. So that's why I feel here against Vettori, he's definitely going to get after him here. I agree with you on that one in the main event. Who do you have?
But it also says something when he has these struggling performances, and he's still coming out on top, and he's still coming out as one of the best fighters in the world. That says something about a guy.
It definitely does. It says a lot about him. And that's why, again, I expect that against Marvin Vettori here, and maybe he wants to shut him up a little bit too about maybe, the whole notion I beat you the first time. I think he wants to put that to bed for good. Figueiredo Moreno, who do you have in that one? And then again, do you think we could see another fight of the year contender here?
Okay, I'm going to answer the second part of that question first. Yes, I think so. I think this one's going to go a full 5 rounds. I think this one's going to be another wild brawl. This is the fight that I've been going back and forth on the most. And, I still, even as we're talking right now, still early in the week, leading up to the fights, I'm still not 100% certain. But I think of, I think that, look at the judges' scorecards on the last time. And had Figueiredo not got deducted the point in the third round for the low blow, Figueiredo would have won the fight, would have retained the championship. I think we still would have seen a rematch because it was just so freaking incredible. And I think, we still would have seen the rematch, and Moreno still would have gotten a second chance. But I think it's not a bad thing. I think it's a very plausible case to say Moreno won that first fight, and maybe you consider him an uncrowned champion. That's why I said the draw is probably the best, scorecard for that first fight. But I think, of Figgy, and I just think of, he had the one weight miss against Joe Benavidez, early in 2020 that looked like, was, oh no, it spelled another doom and gloom potentially for the flyweight division. But the fact that he finished Benavidez in that fight, and, you don't see Benavidez finished as badly as he did against Figueiredo. Like the last time I think of Benavidez getting finished that bad prior to prior to Figueiredo was Demetrius Johnson. Yeah. And the fact that Figueiredo just ran through him the second time, completely obliterated him, choked him unconscious. Again, I hadn't seen anybody dominate him like that since Mighty Mouse. And then what does he do to follow them up? Gets a first round submission in his first title defense. He and Moreno then fight on three weeks later after 255 because all the title fights on 256 fall off. End up producing a fight of the year candidate, and if Figueiredo was able to do that on 3 weeks notice, after the weight issues and, all the pacing and everything, and be one of the fighters of the year, that just tells me in my mind that I think Figueiredo has the championship mindset and championship advantage, that he'll basically be able to make the adjustments, be able to come in with a full game plan. And think about that. The fact that they're both coming in now with full training camps. I think Figueiredo may be able to make the adjustments a little better than Moreno. I think it's going to be an exciting fight. I think we might have another split decision. I wouldn't be surprised if one of the judges sees it as a draw again, but I think it's just going to be this much more in the tank for Figgy that I think he'll edge it out.
Yeah, it has all the rest. It has all the whole recipe, the toppings here, whatever you want to say, for being a fantastic fight of the year candidate for a fight again. Because, you look at what does Figueiredo do? All right, does he throw a ton of volume at times? No, but he's got those massive power shots he throws. Well, what does Moreno do? He's got a fantastic chin, so he could eat a lot of those shots. So you're not getting those first round knockouts. No, and Moreno's got solid boxing. He puts solid volume together. His takedown defense, some of the things he does, he was showing even in that fight against Figueiredo. It just has all that makings again of being a fantastic fight where both guys are going to be going back and forth. But we'll see. As you said, I mean, it's going to be whoever adjusts here the best, because I don't think that's actually maybe it'll be talked about a little this week with the media day, and they'll ask both fighters, I'm sure, about it. But I feel like it's not a point that's being talked about going into this week enough, though, that those guys were fighting on 20, 21 days notice, whatever it was. And they both fought on the same card too. Brandon Moreno was on that same card. It just so happened that both of them took absolutely no damage. And the UFC said, hey, we have a pay-per-view coming up in about a few weeks here. We need somebody. Do you guys want to fight again? And I actually thought at the time it was a mistake because of the weight issues Figueiredo had. I thought we were going to get something disastrous with Figueiredo where he missed weight or he came in depleted or something like that. But yeah, it turned out to be one of the better fights. Again, fight of the year last year of 2020, the weird pandemic year that it was. But I expect something similar here coming up on Saturday night, UFC 263. He is Tom Albano from Fansided. You can follow him on Twitter at Thomas J. Albano. Tom, again, an MMA contributor over at fansided.com. Go check out all of his work. He's fantastic. Loved having you on the show today, Tom. Thanks for joining me, and enjoy all the fights coming up later this week. Again, everybody go follow him on Twitter, and then I'll talk to you down the road, my friend.
Jeff, thank you so much, man. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Thanks again there to Tom Albano from fansided.com. Some great stuff as we went over everything from this past weekend. It started to turn the page. We'll look to have Tom on again sometime soon here, very soon, on the Man in the Cage podcast to break down everything in the combat sports world. All right, everybody, 3 parting shots, and I'm going to get out of here. Already going a little bit over on today's show, episode 93, so I'm going to try to go a little quicker through these. That way I can get out of here, make this episode a little bit shorter. But parting shot number 1 for you, and this one more of a general thing, normally, and that's why the next 2 topics after that actually a little bit more newsy, right, in the MMA and boxing world. But topic number 1 here, I've seen this so much the last couple weeks here. Well, obviously, it's happened historically forever, but I've really seen it even more so over the last couple weeks, and that's because you had the Tyron Woodley fight again get announced against Jake Paul. You've seen some of the other things out there with the YouTuber, the debate there of is it good for boxing? A lot of MMA fans jumping in on that, making fun of it. You've seen both sides kind of attacking each other, and that's why I want to say parting shot number 1 today. Can we stop it as a combat sports community? Can we stop it as boxing fans and MMA fans battling each other? I don't understand it. For some reason, there's this, and it's happened forever, since UFC 1, since whenever, right? And mixed martial arts, a newer sport than boxing. So I get there's some elements to this area. You have the old school versus the new school mixed with now MMA is becoming mainstream or is mainstream now, and it's not as. There's so many things here. There's so many things you can dissect with this kind of rivalry, if you will, between boxing and MMA. But can we stop this? To me, we're all on the same side here. If the boxing game's doing well, then mixed martial arts is doing well. If MMA is doing well, then that gives some respect to boxing, right? That gives respect to both sports. So I don't understand why it's this thing of, it's boxing versus MMA, and, in order for boxing to get better, it's got to be this, or, MMA fans saying, oh, no, boxing's dead. It's Jake Paul and Logan Paul fighting. Can we stop this, though? Because I think we're all on the same side, actually, that, and especially people like myself, who I am a boxing and a mixed martial arts fan. I love both sports. I watch both sports. A lot of you out there will do the same thing. Many of you that will interact with me on Twitter, at Man in the Cage Pod, a lot of you are the same way. But there are people out there who are only boxing fans or MMA fans. And again, that's fine too. You know what? I understand that there are things that aren't for everybody. Not everybody's a baseball fan. Not everybody's a fan of soccer. Not everybody's a fan of even the NFL or basketball or hockey. Not everybody's a fan of every sport. I understand that. But at the same time, I think we're in enough of the same realm as boxing and MMA fans that there should be this somewhat, there should be somewhat of a tight-knit community here to say, you know what, if you don't like MMA or, if you don't like boxing, that's fine. I respect you for that. But we're on the same side here. It's all combat sports. Boxing, obviously, an element of MMA. We have MMA guys now crossing over to boxing now. Conor McGregor did with Floyd Mayweather. You got Tyron Woodley step in there against Jake Paul and maybe try to save the free world here, try to turn the universe back on its right side here after what we saw last night between Logan Paul and Floyd Mayweather. So I think we're all on the same side a little bit here. I don't want to see it anymore. Don't come around my timeline with the boxing versus MMA thing. I disagree with it. I think we should all be on the same side. So that's parting shot number 1 for me today. Next to a little bit more of a less of a happy subject to talk about, especially this next one. Topic number 2 here, one of the former Tough contestants, the Ultimate Fighter contestants, Dan Sayers. He passed away over the weekend, I believe, at the age of 33 years old. Is coming out everywhere now in a lot of the MMA media places, MMA Junkie, MMAfighting.com, all of them have these articles that I believe they found Dan Sayers, I believe, in a river. They found him somewhere. Not going to speculate what happened. Obviously, we don't want to do that, and respect to the family and everything, but just wanted to bring that up today, that just the sad passing of Dan Sayers at the age of 33, former Tough contestant, and someone that I know, even seeing some of the other reaction today from some of the other fans, was similar to myself, that Dan Sayers was an interesting guy. He was a fun guy. He was fun to watch him compete on Tough. It was fun to watch him in his MMA career and his combat sports career compete. So very sad to see him pass away today at the age of 33. So that's topic number 2 today in my parting shots. And then topic number 3, a little less sad than that one, but still one that's not necessarily happy. But Tom Breeze from over the weekend. And this one, maybe even connecting a little bit more with what we've seen in tennis right now and some of the other general sports, and I'll round it all together. I'll make it all make sense here. But Tom Breeze, he was pulled off the card with Antonio Arroyo. They announced on the broadcast, mid UFC Vegas 28 broadcast. For those that didn't see this, they announced that fight all of a sudden was just off mid-fight for unknown medical reasons, unknown medical issues. Again, not going to speculate here, because Tom Breeze, maybe he hurt his foot, maybe he did something that we don't know of, maybe it'll come out, maybe it's already come out, I haven't seen it yet. But as I'm recording this right now, you can't help but to think that Tom Breeze is again dealing with anxiety issues here, where he may have pulled out of this fight like he has in the past. Very well known, he's pulling out a lot of these fights with anxietal issues. And you just hope he's okay, right? And you just hope that, this is the MMA, this is the combat sports game. We're all human beings at the end of the day, though, and we want to get to a point where, obviously combat sports, MMA, it's not the end-all be-all. It's a sport. Are we serious about it? Do we take it serious? Do we want to debate it? Do we want to talk about it? Hold the integrity of the sport? Absolutely. But we're still all human beings here. So, hopefully Tom Breeze is okay. And, he's obviously fought since he's had some of those anxiety issues, but I just want to see him be okay, and be okay as an individual. And if it's really, really killing him to go, and it's really tugging on him this much to go out there on a fight night, especially fight day, and he's been having to do this over and over again, pull out a fight sometimes, I hope maybe he steps away from the game. And that's not trying to be mean to him. I'm not saying, get the hell out of the sport if you got these issues. I'm not making fun of it. I just think, or, at least even, I know he's probably gotten some help for it, but, try to go get some more help then, I guess, and then come back, and hopefully you can, compete, or at least, again, like I said, step away from the game and maybe focus on something else. That way, as a human being, you can find that success, that happiness, that anxiety that he's been feeling as he's been competing on some of these MMA cards. And like I said, that kind of rounds out to me right now with the rest of the sporting world right now, because the Naomi Osaka thing, where Osaka, of course, many people have seen in tennis, she pulled out of the French Open. She was getting fined for not talking to the tennis media there. Said it was anxiety. Said she's had issues in the past with that. Same type of thing, where it's just rounding it out with Tom Breeze and connecting it all here. You just want everybody, again, it's just a sport. You want to see people, and I know there's a segment of people out there that say, oh, they're getting paid a lot. They need to go talk. Okay, I get some of those perspectives, but at the end of the day, they're still human beings. They need to go out there. They need to be able to figure out, what's the issue here? Again, go fix it. Go fix that. Go be the person you need to be. I know it's not as easy as just going and talking to somebody, or there's no magic pill for this necessarily, just to go and cure it automatically and that you'll never deal with it ever again. But just hopefully, Tom Breeze, hopefully some of these athletes can find a way to make things okay. That way, when you do come back, you're in a healthy environment here where you can go talk to the media, or you can go out there on a fight night and compete, or again, step away and, go find something else that makes you happier in your life. That's just my opinion on it. Again, I think it's an issue out there. Obviously, a lot of mental health issues in our country right now, and a lot of them need addressing. And I think that's one of them too, that I think you can be on both sides of the fence here to say, yeah, as human beings, yes, we care about that. We want to see them go get the help they need. That way they can come back, compete, and be the athletes, be the peak performers that they want to be, and that we love as fans, that we love as media, that we love on a daily basis within any of these sports. So that was my parting shot number 3 there. Again, a little bit deeper ones there for topics number 2, number 3, but ones that are important to me. All right, that's going to do it today for episode 93 of the Man in the Cage MMA and Combat Sports Podcast. A lot coming up later this week, as I've been saying the whole show. PFL, Bellator, UFC 263, Invicta, some boxing. I'm going to have it covered wall to wall right here on the Man in the Cage podcast. So follow me on Twitter at Man in the Cage pod. Also follow me on Instagram at Man in the Cage Pod. I'm going to have stuff for everybody all week. I have this episode coming out. I'm also going to have some other surprises this week, some live shows, maybe even previewing that PFL card, as I don't know if I'll have it on my end of the week episode, but I'll have something out there for the PFL previewing that. I'll also get my preview episode as I normally do. I'm also lining up something with a Bellator fighter right now, someone who's going to make their Bellator debut coming up. He was supposed to do it on UFC, Bellator 260, but now he's actually going to make his debut later on this month, hopefully on a Bellator card. So I actually am lining up something right now. I'll make it official on Twitter soon here, but I'm lining up something with a Bellator fighter. I'm going to bring him on the show. So a lot of cool things coming up. You want to make sure you check out the Man in the Cage MMA and Combat Sports podcast every single episode because it's going to be entertaining and you're going to get all of that info out there. And again, same thing on social media. Follow me there as you're going to get all that entertainment stuff and all that stuff to know, to stay in the know with everything because there's so many cards. I get overwhelmed sometimes, but I'm going to be there. I'm going to cover everything for you right here on the Man in the Cage podcast. Again, at Man in the Cage Pod on Twitter, at Man in the Cage Pod on Instagram, Man in the Cage MMA.show is the website for the podcast. Go check that out. Subscribe on YouTube, the Man in the Cage MMA and Combat Sports podcast on YouTube, and then go to Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts, guys. Hit the follow button or the subscribe button to get all the audio versions of the show week in and week out. All right, everybody. Again, that's going to do it for episode 93 today. So pumped for some of the fights we have later this week. So many good ones to dissect. So much to break down with all these. I'll be back later this week, episode 94 of the Man in the Cage podcast. Until then, everybody, I'll talk to you later.